When a desperate single father gave his last $18 to a stranger at a bus stop, he had no idea he was handing money to one of the most powerful CEOs in America, or that this one act of kindness would expose $1 million corporate conspiracy, rebuild his shattered life, and give his daughter the future he thought was lost forever. But the road from rock bottom to redemption is never simple, and the price of doing the right thing might cost him everything he's fought to protect. This is the story of Ethan Cole and how $18 changed 3 lives forever. If you're ready to discover how one small choice can rewrite an entire destiny, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Ethan's story travels. The fluorescent lights of the Quick Mart hummed overhead as Ethan Cole stood in the cereal aisle, staring at the prices like they were written in a foreign language. His daughter's favorite brand, the one with the cartoon rabbit on the box, sat on the shelf at eye level, mocking him with its cheerful colors. $8.49. He had $18 in his pocket. Exactly $18. The last money in the world that belonged to him. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the store brand instead. $3 less. $3 that might buy milk tomorrow, or bread, or whatever else a 6-year-old girl needed to believe her father hadn't completely failed her. The basket at his feet held the bare essentials: pasta, a jar of sauce, a loaf of white bread, peanut butter, and now the generic cereal. He did the math in his head for the 3rd time, knowing it would come out the same. $16.12 plus tax. He'd have maybe $1 left, enough for the bus fare home. Except he couldn't take the bus home. Ethan closed his eyes and saw it again. The moment his life had shattered. His supervisor's face red with manufactured anger, the accusation hanging in the air like poisoned gas. The security guard's hand on his elbow, not rough, but firm enough to communicate that resistance would make everything worse. The walk through the warehouse while his coworkers turned away, some looking embarrassed, others looking satisfied that the new guy was getting what he deserved. "We have video evidence," his supervisor had said, which was a lie. "The missing inventory matches your shift patterns," which was circumstantial. "We're calling the police," which turned out to be a bluff, because they'd simply wanted him gone, not investigated. Ethan hadn't stolen anything. He'd never stolen anything in his life. But explaining that to potential employers was proving impossible, because his supervisor had made sure the word got around. In a town this size, a reputation traveled faster than the truth. He opened his eyes and picked up the basket. The handle dug into his palm as he walked toward the checkout, past the deli counter where rotisserie chickens turned behind glass, their skin golden and crispy and completely out of reach. Lily loved rotisserie chicken. She called it fancy food. God, he missed making her smile. The checkout line moved slowly. Ethan stood behind a woman buying what seemed like a week's worth of groceries, watching the total climb on the register display. $73, $89, $112. She paid with a credit card without flinching, gathered her bags, and walked out into the evening without a backward glance. The cashier was young, maybe 19, with tired eyes that suggested she understood more about survival than her age should allow. She scanned Ethan's items without comment, her fingers moving automatically across the products that told their own story about the customer in front of her. $17.68, she said. Ethan pulled the bills from his pocket. A 10, a 5, 3 ones. The bills were soft from handling, creased and worn. He added coins from his other pocket, counting carefully. The cashier waited without impatience, which he appreciated more than she could know. "Do you have a rewards card?" she asked. "No." "Would you like to sign up? You save 10% on your first purchase." Ethan looked at the total. 10% of $17.68 was about $1.75. With the sign-up, he'd save money. But it required an email address, a phone number, information that felt like it belonged to a person with a future, not someone standing in a grocery store trying to figure out how to feed his daughter on nothing. "Not today," he said quietly. "Thank you, though." She nodded and took his money. The register drawer opened with a mechanical ding. She counted his change, $1.32, into his palm. The coins were cold. Ethan took the single plastic bag and walked out into the October evening. The sun was setting early now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if he'd had the energy to notice. The parking lot stretched before him, half empty, filled with cars he couldn't afford to maintain even if someone gave them to him for free. He'd sold his car 3 weeks ago. A 2008 Honda with a failing transmission and 200,000 miles. He'd gotten $900 for it, which had seemed like a fortune until it disappeared into overdue rent, an electric bill, and Lily's shoes because her feet kept growing and children didn't care that their fathers had lost everything. The bus stop was a block away. A small shelter with plastic walls covered in graffiti and old advertisements. Ethan walked slowly, the grocery bag swinging at his side, and tried not to think about the future. The future was tomorrow, and tomorrow was impossible, so he focused on tonight. Get home, make dinner, help Lily with her homework, read her a story, tuck her in, tell her everything would be okay. That last part was getting harder. The bus shelter came into view. Someone was already there, sitting on the bench inside, hunched forward with their face in their hands. As Ethan got closer, he could see it was a woman, middle-aged, wearing clothes that looked expensive but disheveled, like she'd been wearing them too long. Her hair was dark, streaked with gray, and falling loose from what had probably been a professional style hours ago. She was crying, not loud, dramatic crying, but the quiet kind that spoke of exhaustion and defeat. Her shoulders shook slightly with each breath. Ethan hesitated at the edge of the shelter. The bus wouldn't come for another 20 minutes, according to the schedule posted on the wall. He could stand outside, give her privacy. But the wind was picking up, carrying the first real cold of autumn, and his jacket was thin. He stepped inside and sat on the far end of the bench, putting as much distance between them as the small space allowed. The woman didn't acknowledge him. She kept her face in her hands, her breath coming in shaky waves. Ethan set his grocery bag on the ground between his feet and stared out at the street. Cars passed intermittently, their headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Somewhere a dog barked. Someone's dinner smelled like grilled meat, and his stomach twisted with hunger he'd been ignoring all day. The woman's crying gradually subsided into silence. She lowered her hands and Ethan saw her face properly for the first time. She was probably in her 50s, with sharp features that suggested competence and control, but her eyes were red-rimmed and lost. Her makeup was smeared. There was a small cut on her cheek, barely visible, like she'd been struck or had fallen. She noticed him looking and turned away quickly, embarrassed. Her hands moved to her lap where a small leather purse sat. She opened it and began searching through it with increasing desperation, pulling out items and setting them on the bench. A phone with a cracked screen. A set of keys. A lipstick. A pen. Loose receipts. No wallet. "Damn it," she whispered, and her voice cracked on the words. "Damn it, damn it, damn it." She put everything back in the purse and pulled out a small zippered pocket inside. From this she extracted coins. Ethan watched as she counted them in her palm. Quarters, dimes, nickels. She counted twice, then a third time, as if the total might change. $1.65. The woman's face crumpled again, but this time she didn't cry. She just sat there holding the coins, staring at them like they represented everything wrong with the universe. Ethan knew that look. He'd worn it himself an hour ago in the cereal aisle. "The bus fare is $2.50, she said to no one in particular. Her voice was cultured, educated, the kind of voice that belonged in boardrooms or courtrooms. It made the defeat in her tone even more striking. "I need $2.50 and I have $1.65 and my phone is dead and I can't call anyone and I don't know what to do." She wasn't talking to Ethan specifically. She was talking to the universe or to herself or to whatever force had brought her to this moment. But Ethan heard her anyway. He should stay quiet. He should mind his business. He had his own problems. Problems that would still be waiting when he got home. Problems that $1.32 wouldn't solve, but at least represented the possibility of solving something someday. But he couldn't stop looking at her hands holding those coins. Couldn't stop seeing the desperation in her grip. Couldn't stop recognizing himself in her posture. "Where do you need to go?" The words came out before he'd decided to speak them. The woman looked at him, startled, as if she'd forgotten anyone else existed. Her eyes were a striking gray-green, intelligent despite the tears. "What?" "Where are you trying to get to?" Ethan asked. "How far is it?" She blinked, processing the question. The Preston Hotel, downtown. It's about 4 miles. 4 miles. The bus would take her there. Walking would take her over an hour in the dark, in heels, in her current state. Ethan could see she was barely holding together as it was. I was robbed, she said suddenly, words tumbling out in a rush. 2 hours ago. I was walking to my car after a meeting and someone grabbed my bag. My real bag, not this. She lifted the small purse. This was in my coat pocket. They took everything, my wallet, my cards, my phone charger, my... She stopped, swallowing hard. Everything. Did you call the police? I tried. A shopkeeper let me use his phone, but they said they'd send someone to take a report. No one came. And I couldn't wait anymore because I have to get back to... She cut herself off, like the rest of the sentence was too private to share with a stranger. Ethan understood. There was always something you had to get back to, someone depending on you, something that couldn't wait even when the world was falling apart. He looked down at the $1.32 in his own pocket. The weight of it felt both enormous and insignificant. With it, he could take the bus home. Without it, he'd walk. 3 miles in the dark, carrying groceries. He'd done worse. But if he gave her the money for bus fare, he'd have nothing. And she'd still be 85 cents short. The math was simple. Brutal, but simple. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out everything he had. The dollar bill, the quarter, the nickel, the 2 pennies. He held it out to her. Here, he said. The woman stared at his hand like he was offering her a live grenade. What? No, I can't. It's okay, Ethan said, and he was surprised to find he meant it. Take it. That's your bus fare, she said, looking at his face now, really looking. You need to get home too. I'll walk. No, that's not... You don't have to... She was shaking her head, but her eyes kept flicking to the money in his palm. I can't take your last money. It's not my last, Ethan lied. I have more at home. You need this more than I do right now. It was perhaps the most dishonest and most honest thing he'd ever said. He didn't have more at home, but she did need it more, because he could walk, and she looked like walking would break her. The woman's throat worked as she swallowed. I don't even know your name. Ethan. Ethan Cole. Victoria, she said quietly. Victoria Hale. She reached out slowly and took the money from his hand. Her fingers brushed his palm, and he felt how cold she was. When she added his money to hers, she counted the total twice, like she couldn't believe it was real. $2.97, she whispered. I can take the bus. Good, Ethan said, and he meant that too. Victoria looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, yes, but something else beneath it. Something like recognition, or maybe just exhaustion that mirrored his own. Thank you, she said. I don't know how to thank you properly, but I will. I promise I'll pay you back. If you give me your address or your phone number, don't worry about it, Ethan said, standing up. He picked up his grocery bag. Just get where you need to go safely. Wait, please, I can't just... Victoria stood too, fumbling with her purse. Let me at least get your information. I keep my promises. Ethan thought about giving her his address, thought about the apartment he was 3 weeks behind on rent for, the phone that had been disconnected last week, the life that was held together with duct tape and denial. What would this well-dressed woman think if she saw how he actually lived? It's really okay, he said. Consider it a gift from one person having a bad day to another. He started walking before she could protest again. Behind him, he heard her call out, Thank you, Ethan Cole. I won't forget this. He raised one hand in acknowledgement, but didn't turn around. The wind cut through his jacket, and the grocery bag bumped against his leg with each step. 3 miles. He could do 3 miles. He'd done harder things. The sky was fully dark by the time Ethan turned onto Maple Street, where his apartment building squatted like a tired old man. 4 stories of brown brick, built in the 70s and barely maintained since. His unit was on the 3rd floor, number 3C, with windows that overlooked the parking lot and a heater that only worked when it felt like it. His legs ached. The plastic grocery bag had cut into his fingers despite switching hands every few blocks. But he'd made it, and the pasta would fill Lily's stomach, and tomorrow he'd figure out tomorrow. The stairs creaked under his weight. On the second-floor landing, he passed Mrs. Chen, who gave him a sympathetic look that made him feel worse than pity ever could. She knew he'd lost his job. Everyone in the building knew. News traveled fast in cheap housing. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "I have some extra rice if you need." "We're okay, Mrs. Chen, thank you." She nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe him. Ethan unlocked his door and stepped into the small apartment that had been home for 2 years. The living room was barely big enough for a couch and a TV stand. The kitchen was a galley with appliances that had been old when he moved in. Down the short hallway were 2 bedrooms, one barely larger than a closet. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration the way it always did when she was thinking hard. She looked up when he entered and her whole face lit up. "Daddy!" She jumped down from her chair and ran to him. Ethan set down the grocery bag just in time to catch her, lifting her up in a hug that made his tired arms protest. She was getting heavier, growing. Soon he wouldn't be able to lift her like this anymore. "Hey, sweetheart," he said into her hair. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo that was almost gone, the last bottle. He'd have to figure out how to get more. "I finished my math homework all by myself," Lily announced proudly, pulling back to look at his face. "Ms. Peterson said we had to do 20 problems, and I did all 20, and I only had to erase 3 times. That's wonderful, Lil. I'm so proud of you." "Can we have chicken nuggets for dinner?" Ethan's heart sank. The chicken nuggets were gone. They'd finished them last night. He'd meant to buy more, but they were $7 a box, and pasta was cheaper and fed them for more meals. "How about spaghetti?" he suggested, setting her down and picking up the grocery bag. "With garlic bread?" He didn't have garlic bread. He was lying to his daughter about garlic bread. "Okay," Lily said, because she was 6 and adaptable, and didn't yet understand all the things her father couldn't give her. "Can I help cook?" "You can set the table." While Lily carefully placed forks and napkins at their 2 spots, Ethan boiled water and opened the jar of sauce. The apartment filled with the smell of tomatoes and basil. He made the pasta stretch by adding extra water, making it soupy, telling himself it was more of a pasta soup anyway. They ate at the small table, Lily chattering about school, and her friend Emma and the science project they were doing on butterflies. Ethan made the right sounds at the right times, asked the right questions, and tried not to think about the fact that she was going to bed hungry tonight, even if she didn't know it yet. After dinner, he helped her brush her teeth with the last of the toothpaste, squeezing the tube until it was completely flat. He read her a library book about a mouse who went on adventures, doing all the voices the way she liked. He tucked her in with her worn stuffed rabbit and kissed her forehead. "Daddy?" she said as he reached for the light switch. "Yeah, sweetheart?" "Are you sad?" The question hit him like a physical blow. "Why do you ask that?" "You look sad sometimes, like today when you came home." Ethan walked back to her bed and knelt down beside it. In the dim light from the hallway, her eyes were huge and worried. 6 years old and already learning to read the weight in her father's shoulders. "I'm not sad," he said, which was true and untrue at the same time. "I'm just tired. But you know what makes me not tired?" "What?" "You. Every time I see you smile, I'm not tired anymore." She smiled then, her baby teeth showing. "Like this?" "Exactly like that." "Then I'll smile lots," she said seriously. "So you're never tired." Ethan had to look away before the burning in his eyes became tears she'd notice. "That's a good plan. Now get some sleep, okay? School tomorrow." "Okay. Love you, Daddy." "Love you too, Lil. More than anything in the world." He turned off the light and closed her door to a crack, the way she liked it. Then he stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to her breathe, trying to remember when his life had become this series of impossible choices and hollow victories. In the living room, he sat on the couch and stared at nothing. The TV stayed off. The electricity bill was overdue, and he was trying to use as little as possible to stretch the days before they shut it off. His phone was dead, not just out of battery, but actually disconnected. The service had been cut 3 days ago when he couldn't pay the bill. It sat on the coffee table like an expensive paperweight, useless and mocking. Tomorrow he'd have to figure out breakfast. There was still peanut butter and bread, and the cereal would last a few days if he was careful about portions. After that, he didn't know. The food bank was open on Thursdays. He could go Thursday, stand in line with the other people who'd fallen through the cracks, take the charity boxes with their dented cans and day-old bread, and be grateful. He was grateful. He was so grateful it made him angry. Ethan pulled out his wallet, which contained his ID, a maxed-out credit card he couldn't use, and a picture of Lily on her first day of kindergarten. No money, no bus fare, no phone, no job, no prospects. But he'd helped someone tonight, for whatever that was worth. He thought about Victoria Hale counting her coins, the defeat in her posture, the fear in her eyes. He wondered if she'd made it to the Preston Hotel safely, wondered who she was meeting there that mattered enough to break down over being late. Probably he'd never know. Probably she'd forget him by morning, just another stranger who'd shown a moment of kindness and then faded into the background noise of the city. That was fine. He hadn't done it for recognition. He'd done it because he'd looked at her and seen himself, and because choosing not to help would have meant becoming someone he didn't want to be. Even broke, even desperate, even backed against a wall with no way out, he could still choose to be the kind of man who gave away his last dollar to someone who needed it more. Maybe that was all he had left. Maybe that was enough. Ethan lay down on the couch, too tired to walk the 10 feet to his bedroom. Sleep came quickly, heavy and dreamless. The sleep of someone who'd been running on empty for too long. He didn't hear the first knock on his door, but he heard the second one, louder, more insistent, his eyes open to morning light streaming through the thin curtains. He sat up, disoriented. The knock came again. "Mr. Cole? Ethan Cole?" The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. Ethan stood and walked to the door, running a hand through his hair. Through the peephole, he saw a man in a dark suit standing in the hallway. Behind him, barely visible at the edge of the frame, were other people. Ethan's first thought was police. His second was eviction. His third was something worse he couldn't even name. He opened the door. The man in the suit was in his 30s, clean-shaven, with the kind of posture that spoke of military or security background. Behind him stood two more identical men, and behind them, Ethan's breath caught. Victoria Hale stood in his hallway, but she was transformed. The disheveled, broken woman from the bus stop was gone. This Victoria wore an immaculate gray suit, her hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She stood with the bearing of someone used to commanding rooms, and her gray-green eyes were sharp and alert. But it was definitely her. Same face, same eyes, same person. "Mr. Cole," she said, and even her voice was different, stronger, clearer. "We need to talk." Ethan became aware that he was wearing the same clothes he'd slept in, that his apartment probably smelled like old pasta, that Lily would be waking up any minute. "I don't understand," he said. "I know," Victoria said. "May we come in? I promise this won't take long, and I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." One of the suited men stepped forward. "Ma'am, we haven't secured the interior." Victoria waved him off without looking at him. "It's fine, Marcus. Mr. Cole isn't a threat." She walked past Ethan into his apartment, and the transformation of space was immediate. His small, shabby living room seemed to shrink further in the presence of her confidence. She looked around with quick, assessing eyes, taking in the worn furniture, the bare walls, the obvious signs of poverty barely held at bay. "Daddy?" Lily appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes. She froze when she saw the strangers. "Who are these people?" Ethan moved quickly to her, kneeling down. "It's okay, sweetheart. These are friends. Go get dressed for school, okay?" "Okay," Lily said uncertainly, looking past him at Victoria with open curiosity. When she disappeared back into her room, Ethan turned to Victoria. "What's going on? How did you find me?" "Your name," Victoria said simply. "You gave me your name. It wasn't hard to locate you from there." She paused. "I told you I keep my promises, Mr. Cole." "I don't understand what you're promising." Victoria reached into her purse, a different purse, expensive leather, and pulled out a white envelope. She held it out to him. "This is $5,000, she said, "to repay you for last night and to apologize for not being able to thank you properly at the time." Ethan stared at the envelope like it might explode. $5,000? I gave you $1.32. You gave me your last $1.32, Victoria corrected. You gave me everything you had when you had nothing. That's worth considerably more than the face value. I can't accept this. But even as he said it, Ethan's mind was racing. $5,000, rent, food, Lily's shoes that actually fit. Time to find a job without the panic of immediate eviction. You can, and you will, Victoria said firmly. But that's not why I'm really here. She walked to his couch and sat down, gesturing for him to do the same. The suited men remained by the door, silent sentinels. Ethan sat slowly, the envelope still in his hand, feeling like reality had tilted sideways. Last night I was robbed, Victoria began. But what I didn't tell you was that it wasn't random. Someone took my bag because they knew who I am and what I carry. Someone who works for me, or who was hired by someone who works for me. I don't understand what this has to do with me. I'm the CEO of Hale Industries, Victoria continued. We're a manufacturing and logistics company with 17 locations across 3 states. We employ over 4,000 people, and we're worth approximately $800 million. The number was so large, Ethan couldn't properly conceptualize it. Last night, I was on my way to what I thought was a routine meeting, Victoria said. Instead, I walked into an attempted corporate coup. 3 of my senior executives were waiting to present me with buyout papers and resign en masse, taking their teams with them. It was carefully orchestrated to cripple the company at a critical juncture. What happened? I walked out, Victoria said simply. I told them they could all go straight to hell. Then I went to my car and found my bag had been stolen, which meant I couldn't drive home, couldn't make calls, couldn't access my accounts. I was stranded, deliberately, by people I trusted. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. But here's what's interesting, Mr. Cole. In one of the worst nights of my professional life, when my entire company was being stolen out from under me, a stranger gave me his last money and asked for nothing in return. Do you understand how rare that is? I was just trying to help. Exactly, Victoria said. You helped. No agenda, no angle, no leverage play. You saw another human being in trouble, and you helped, even when it cost you something you couldn't afford to lose. She paused. That tells me something about your character. What does it tell you? That you're the kind of person I need right now. Ethan shook his head. I don't know anything about manufacturing or logistics or... I'm not offering you a job in manufacturing, Victoria interrupted. I'm offering you a job helping me find out who's trying to destroy my company. Someone inside is feeding information to my competitors. Someone stole my bag last night at precisely the right moment to leave me vulnerable. Someone is playing a very dangerous game, and I need help figuring out who. Why me? You must have security, investigators. I do, Victoria said, and I don't know which of them I can trust anymore. But you, Mr. Cole, I can trust, because you proved it when you didn't have to. I'm not a detective, Ethan said. I worked in a warehouse until they fired me for theft I didn't commit. I know, Victoria said gently. I looked into your background. I also looked into the circumstances of your termination. Your supervisor has been skimming inventory for 8 months and needed a scapegoat. You were convenient. The words hit Ethan like a punch. What? It's all documented, Victoria said. If you want, I can provide evidence to the police. But that's not what I'm here to discuss. Ethan's hands were shaking. He ruined my life. I can't get hired anywhere because of what he said I did. I know, Victoria said, and I'm sorry, but I can give you a chance to rebuild. Work with me. Help me find the truth. In return, I'll pay you a consulting salary, let's say $10,000 a month to start. And when this is over, if you've done well, I'll find you a permanent position. Something legitimate. Something with a future. $10,000 a month. The number was incomprehensible. Ethan made that much in 3 months at the warehouse, back when he'd had a job. Why would you trust me with something this important? He asked quietly. You don't know me. I know what matters, Victoria said. I know that when you had every reason to think only of yourself, you thought of someone else instead. That's more valuable than any credential. Behind her, one of the suited men cleared his throat. Ma'am, we need to leave for the morning meeting. Victoria stood. Think about it, Mr. Cole. That's my phone number on the envelope. Call me when you've decided, but please decide quickly. Time is not on our side. She walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Last night, you asked me where I needed to go, she said. I told you the Preston Hotel. Do you want to know why? Ethan nodded. I was meeting my daughter, Victoria said softly. She's 10. She was at the hotel with her nanny, waiting for me to come read her a bedtime story like I promised. When you gave me that bus fare, you didn't just help me. You helped me keep a promise to a little girl who'd already been disappointed too many times by a mother who works too much. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway where Lily had disappeared. I think you understand what that means, Victoria said. More than most people would. Then she was gone, the suited men filing out behind her, leaving Ethan alone in his apartment with $5,000 in his hand and a job offer that sounded like either salvation or insanity. He opened the envelope. The money was real, $100 bills, crisp and new, more money than he'd seen in one place in years. From her bedroom, he heard Lily singing to herself as she got dressed, a simple song about butterflies. She'd learned it in school. Ethan looked at the money, looked at the door, looked at the hallway where his daughter was singing. Whatever happened next, his life had just changed. The only question was whether it had changed for better or worse. The coffee in the styrofoam cup had gone cold an hour ago, but Ethan kept holding it anyway, needing something to do with his hands. He sat in the lobby of Hale Industries headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel in the business district he'd only ever seen from bus windows. The marble floors were so polished he could see his reflection, distorted and uncertain. 3 days had passed since Victoria Hale walked into his apartment and turned his world sideways. 3 days of lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide if accepting her offer made him smart or foolish. 3 days of watching Lily eat real meals again, her plate full, her smile bright, while the weight of that white envelope pressed against his conscience. He'd used $1,000 to pay rent and utilities. Another $500 for groceries that actually filled the cabinets. The rest sat in his sock drawer because he didn't have a bank account anymore. They'd closed it when the overdraft fees exceeded the balance. The money felt both like salvation and like a debt he didn't know how to repay. Yesterday, he'd called the number Victoria left. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. Mrs. Hale's office. This is Ethan Cole. She told me to call when I'd made a decision. A pause, then, please hold, Mr. Cole. 30 seconds of classical music, then Victoria's voice, clear and direct. You're accepting. It wasn't a question. I don't know what I'm accepting, Ethan said. I don't know what you need me to do. Come to the office tomorrow, 9 a.m. I'll explain everything. I have to get my daughter to school first. 10 a.m. then. Ask for me at the front desk. They'll be expecting you. And now here he was, in clothes he'd bought at Goodwill yesterday, slacks that almost fit, and a button-down shirt with a small stain on the collar he'd tried to hide with the tie he hadn't worn in 2 years. The security guard had looked at him skeptically when he'd entered, like he was obviously out of place in this cathedral of commerce. Mr. Cole? Ethan looked up. A young woman in her 20s stood before him, tablet in hand, her expression politely professional. Mrs. Hale is ready for you, if you'll follow me. The elevator climbed silently to the 23rd floor. The woman, she'd introduced herself as Jessica, Mrs. Hale's assistant, made small talk about the weather while Ethan tried not to stare at the city spreading out below them through the glass walls. From this height, the streets where he'd walked with his last $18 looked like toy models. The elevator opened onto an executive floor that felt more like a luxury hotel than an office. Dark wood panels, abstract art on the walls, carpet so thick it absorbed sound. Jessica led him down a hallway past closed doors with brass nameplates. Senior Vice President of Operations, Chief Financial Officer, Director of Strategic Planning. Victoria's office was at the end of the hall, behind double doors that Jessica opened without knocking. Mr. Cole for you, Mrs. Hale. Thank you, Jessica. Hold my calls. The office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Victoria sat behind a desk that looked like it cost more than Ethan's car had, but she stood when he entered, gesturing to a seating area with leather chairs and a low table. Thank you for coming, she said. Coffee? Real coffee, not lobby coffee. I'm fine, thank you. Victoria poured herself a cup from a carafe on the sideboard and sat across from him. Today she wore a navy suit that probably cost a month of his old salary, her hair pulled back, diamond studs in her ears that caught the light. The transformation from the desperate woman at the bus stop was complete, except for her eyes. Her eyes still carried that edge of exhaustion he recognized. "You look uncomfortable," she observed. "I don't belong here," Ethan said honestly. "Yet here you are." Victoria took a sip of coffee. "Let me tell you what's happening, Mr. Cole. 3 weeks ago, I discovered irregularities in our quarterly reports. Small things, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Revenue streams that didn't quite match up, expenses that seemed inflated. Nothing dramatic, but consistent." "Someone's stealing?" "Someone's moving money," Victoria corrected, "hiding it in legitimate-looking transactions. I've been with this company for 22 years. I built it from a mid-sized operation my father left me into what it is now. I know every department, every process. These irregularities are new." She set down her coffee and leaned forward. I started asking questions, quietly, through my CFO. 2 days later, someone hacked my personal email. The day after that, my assistant's computer was compromised. Then came the coup attempt, my 3 senior executives trying to force me out. And then the robbery timed perfectly to leave me vulnerable. "You think it's all connected?" "I know it is," Victoria said. "Someone inside this company is orchestrating a takeover. They're stealing money to fund it, gathering allies, eliminating opposition. And they're doing it carefully enough that I can't prove who's behind it." Ethan shifted in the expensive chair. "What do you want me to do? I'm not an accountant or an investigator." "No, but you're invisible," Victoria said. "No one here knows you. You have no history with the company, no allegiances, no profile. You can look at things without anyone watching you the way they watch me." "Look at what?" Victoria stood and walked to her desk, returning with a thick folder. She handed it to Ethan. Inside were personnel files, financial reports, organizational charts, a maze of information that meant nothing to him at first glance. "I need you to review our records," Victoria said. "Personnel files, expense reports, email logs. I need fresh eyes, someone who isn't embedded in the culture here, someone who can spot patterns I'm too close to see." "I don't know how to read most of this," Ethan said, flipping through pages of spreadsheets and corporate jargon. "I'll teach you," Victoria said. "That's why you're here. I'm not expecting miracles, Mr. Cole. I'm expecting honesty. Look at the information and tell me what you see. Ask questions when things don't make sense. Trust your instincts." "My instincts got me fired from a warehouse job." "Your instincts gave away your last money to a stranger," Victoria countered. "I'll take that kind of judgment over credentials any day." One of the suited men from the apartment, Marcus, Ethan remembered, appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Hale, your 10:30 is here." "Cancel it," Victoria said without looking up. "It's the board liaison. He's insisting. Then he can insist to Jessica. I'm busy." Marcus withdrew. Victoria turned back to Ethan, and for the first time he saw something vulnerable in her expression. "I need someone I can trust," she said quietly. "Do you understand how rare that is at this level? Everyone wants something. Everyone has an agenda. My board wants growth. My executives want power. My shareholders want returns. But you, Mr. Cole, you wanted nothing from me except for me to get home safely." "I was just being decent." "Exactly," Victoria said. "And decent is what I need right now." Ethan looked down at the folder in his hands. Pages and pages of corporate machinery, the inner workings of a world he'd never been part of. It was overwhelming. It was impossible. But the money in his sock drawer had bought Lily a new winter coat yesterday, had put real food on the table, had given him breathing room for the first time in months. "Where do I start?" he asked. Victoria's smile was equal parts relief and determination. "We start with the people closest to me, the ones who had access to everything." For the next 4 hours, Victoria walked Ethan through the company's structure. She explained how the departments interconnected, how money flowed through the organization, how decisions moved from concept to execution. She showed him the email hack that had compromised her communications, the financial irregularities that had first caught her attention, the timeline of events leading to the coup attempt. "These 3, Victoria said, spreading photographs on the table. Stephen Chen, VP of Operations. Margaret Weiss, Chief Financial Officer. David Price, Director of Strategic Planning. They're the ones who tried to force me out. They claimed the company was failing under my leadership, that the board had lost confidence, that accepting their buyout was the only way to save jobs. Was any of it true? Ethan asked. The company is under pressure, Victoria admitted. We're in a competitive industry, margins are tight, and we've had some setbacks. But failing? No. Someone's been making us look worse than we are, manipulating the numbers to create a narrative. Chen, Weiss, and Price, they're gone now? They resigned, Victoria said. Or rather, they tried to resign dramatically and take their teams with them. I called their bluff. Told them the door was right there. They weren't expecting that. Did they leave? 2 of them did. Chen took a job with one of our competitors last week. Price is in talks with another firm. Victoria's jaw tightened. But Margaret stayed. Said she'd been coerced, that the other 2 had pressured her into participating. She claimed she wanted to make things right. Do you believe her? I don't know, Victoria said, and the admission seemed to cost her. Margaret's been with me for 8 years. She's brilliant, ruthless when she needs to be, but I trusted her. Now I don't know if that was justified or if I was blind. Ethan studied the photographs. Chen was in his 40s, Asian, with an expression of calculated confidence. Price looked younger, aggressive, the kind of smooth talker who'd learned to sell anything. Margaret Weiss was older, maybe 60, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bearing that reminded him of his high school principal. What about the robbery? Ethan asked. Who knew you'd be at that location? That's the question that keeps me awake, Victoria said. The meeting was set up through my assistant Jessica. The location was chosen by Chen. The timing was communicated to my security team, which means Marcus and his people knew. The board liaison knew because I had to clear my schedule. Margaret knew because she handles my calendar reconciliation. So at least 5 people, probably more. Probably a dozen or more if you count support staff, IT, people who could have seen the calendar update. Victoria rubbed her temples. The point is, someone used that information to arrange the theft. They knew exactly where I'd be and when. Did you get your things back? My bag turned up in a dumpster 3 blocks away. Wallet gone, phone destroyed, but the bag itself was there, which tells me this wasn't about money. It was about disruption. Ethan flipped through more pages, trying to absorb information that felt like drinking from a fire hose. Revenue reports, expense ledgers, email chains discussing strategy and operations. One name kept appearing across multiple documents. Who's Robert Chen? He asked. Relation to Stephen Chen? Victoria's expression darkened. Stephen's brother. He works in our IT department. Senior systems administrator. So he has access to everything, Victoria finished. Email servers, financial systems, security protocols. If someone wanted to hack internal communications or manipulate data, Robert would be the person to ask. Have you questioned him? I can't, Victoria said. Not directly. If Robert is involved and I confront him, he'll know I'm investigating and warn whoever he's working with. I need evidence first. So you want me to find evidence? I want you to look, Victoria corrected. Start with the financial irregularities. Margaret can give you access to the detailed expense reports. Look for patterns, anything that seems off. Then we'll go from there. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jessica poked her head in, looking apologetic. Mrs. Hale, I'm sorry, but the board chair is calling. He says it's urgent. Victoria sighed. Victoria, tell him I'll call back in 20 minutes. He says it can't wait. Something about the quarterly projections. For a moment, Victoria looked like she wanted to throw something. Then she smoothed her expression and stood. Mr. Cole, I need to take this. Jessica will set you up with an office and get you access credentials. Start reviewing the expense reports from the last 6 months. Look for anything unusual, travel that doesn't make sense, vendor payments that seem excessive, patterns in timing or amounts. We'll meet again tomorrow morning. Okay, Ethan said, feeling completely out of his depth. Victoria paused at her desk, her hand on the phone. Thank you for doing this. I know it's overwhelming. Why do you really trust me? Ethan asked. The truth. Victoria met his eyes. Because when you gave me that money, you didn't know who I was. You helped me when I was nobody to you. That's the kind of character that can't be faked, Mr. Cole. And it's exactly what I need right now. She picked up the phone and her voice shifted into corporate authority. Robert, thank you for holding. Let's discuss these projections. Jessica led Ethan to a small office 3 doors down from Victoria's. It had a window, a desk, a computer, and a door that closed, more privacy and dignity than he'd had in years. Mrs. Hale had this set up this morning, Jessica explained, logging him into the computer. Your credentials will give you access to the financial database and personnel files. If you need anything, you can reach me at extension 2301. Thank you, Ethan said. Jessica hesitated at the door. Can I ask you something, Mr. Cole? Sure. How do you know Mrs. Hale? You're not from the industry, are you? Ethan considered lying, then decided against it. We met by chance. She needed help, and I was there. Jessica nodded slowly, like that explained something. She's been different the last few days. More focused, but also more, I don't know, like she's found something she was looking for. She smiled. Anyway, welcome aboard. Let me know if you need anything. When she left, Ethan sat at the desk and stared at the computer screen. The financial database was a labyrinth of folders and files, each one representing millions of dollars in transactions. He had no idea where to begin. But he thought about Victoria's exhaustion, about the vulnerability in her eyes when she'd talked about trust. He thought about Lily's new coat, about the groceries in his cabinet, about the chance to rebuild a life that had been destroyed by someone else's lies. He opened the first expense report and started reading. The numbers blurred together after the first hour. Travel expenses, vendor payments, office supplies, equipment purchases, a constant stream of corporate spending that meant nothing to him without context. But Ethan forced himself to focus, making notes when something seemed odd, even if he didn't know why. A payment to a consulting firm called Meridian Solutions appeared 17 times across 3 months, always for exactly $47,500. The round number felt wrong somehow, too neat for legitimate variable costs. Travel expenses for David Price showed trips to Chicago every 2 weeks for 6 months, always staying at the same hotel, always billing meals at the same 3 restaurants. Ethan didn't know if that meant anything, but it felt like a pattern worth noting. By 3 p.m., his eyes burned and his head throbbed. He'd filled 5 pages with notes that might be meaningless. But he kept going, driven by the memory of Victoria's voice saying she needed someone she could trust. A soft knock made him look up. Margaret Weiss stood in his doorway, her expression cool and assessing. "Mr. Cole?" she said. "I'm told you're reviewing our financial records." Ethan stood, suddenly aware that this woman controlled the very information he was investigating. "Mrs. Hale asked me to look for irregularities." "I see." Margaret stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. "May I ask what your qualifications are for financial analysis?" "I don't have any." "Then perhaps you could explain what you're hoping to find that our accounting department missed." Her tone was polite but edged with something harder. Ethan met her eyes and saw intelligence there, and calculation, and wariness. "I'm just looking," he said carefully. Mrs. Hale thought fresh eyes might help. "Fresh eyes," Margaret repeated. How diplomatic. What she means is that she doesn't trust the people who've been running this company while she's been distracted by her personal dramas. "I wouldn't know about that." "No, you wouldn't, would you?" Margaret moved closer to the desk, glancing at his notes. "You're the man from the bus stop, the one who gave her money." Ethan said nothing. "She told me about it," Margaret continued. "Said you were exactly what she needed, someone with no connection to the company, no agenda beyond helping. It's very touching, really. Also incredibly naive." "Mrs. Weiss, let me save you some time, Mr. Cole. The irregularities Victoria is so concerned about, they're standard operational costs that she's chosen to interpret as suspicious because she's looking for conspiracy where there's only complexity. The coup attempt was 3 executives trying to save a sinking company from a CEO who's lost her edge, and the robbery was random street crime, not some elaborate corporate plot." "If you believe that, why are you still here?" Ethan asked. Margaret's smile was thin. "Because Victoria Hale built something remarkable, and I won't abandon it just because she's having a paranoid episode. But I also won't stand by while she tears apart this company looking for traitors in every shadow." She turned toward the door, then paused. "A word of advice, Mr. Cole. Be very careful about whose trust you accept. Victoria's brilliant and dedicated, but she's also isolated and frightened right now. Frightened people make dangerous decisions. They see enemies everywhere, even in people trying to help them. Margaret left, pulling the door closed with a quiet click that felt ominous. Ethan sat down slowly, his mind racing. Margaret's visit wasn't casual concern. It was a warning, or a threat, or both. She wanted him to know she was watching, that she knew who he was and why he was here. The question was whether she was trying to protect the company or protect herself. He looked back at his notes, at the patterns he'd been tracking. The Meridian Solutions payments, the repetitive travel, the timing that seemed too convenient. Maybe Margaret was right, and he was seeing conspiracy and coincidence. Or maybe he was seeing exactly what someone didn't want him to see. Ethan pulled up the Meridian Solutions file and started digging deeper. The company had been paid over $800,000 in 6 months for strategic consulting services. But there was no contract on file, no deliverables specified, no project documentation. He searched for Meridian Solutions online. The website was professional but vague, offering services in business optimization and operational efficiency without specifying what that actually meant. The address listed was in Chicago, where David Price had been traveling every 2 weeks. Ethan made a note and kept searching. The vendor contact for Meridian Solutions was listed as someone named Marcus Chen. Not Robert Chen from IT, but another Chen. Possibly another relation. A family operation, maybe. Stephen Chen pushing for the coup, Robert Chen in IT with access to everything, Marcus Chen receiving payments through a consulting firm, David Price traveling to Chicago where Meridian Solutions was based. It could all be coincidence. It could also be the shape of something much larger. Ethan worked until the sun set outside his window, until the office around him emptied and the building grew quiet. He documented everything he found, cross-referencing names and dates and dollar amounts, building a timeline that suggested coordination even if it couldn't yet prove intent. At 7 p.m., his phone buzzed. The new phone Victoria had given him that morning, along with a company credit card for expenses. Her name appeared on the screen. "Mr. Cole, you're still there?" "Still working through the files. Find anything?" Ethan hesitated. "Maybe. I need to verify some things first." "Can it wait until tomorrow?" "Yes." "Then go home, Mr. Cole. See your daughter. This will still be here in the morning." He wanted to keep working, to follow the threads he'd found. But Victoria was right. Lily would be wondering where he was. Mrs. Chen from downstairs had agreed to watch her after school, but Ethan had promised to be home by 6. "Thank you, Mrs. Hale." "Victoria," she corrected. "At least when it's just us. Mrs. Hale makes me feel like my mother-in-law." Ethan smiled despite himself. "Victoria, then. I'll see you tomorrow." The subway ride home felt surreal, like he was inhabiting someone else's life. He wore borrowed respectability, carried a corporate phone, had spent the day in a glass tower investigating financial crimes. Yesterday, he'd been a fired warehouse worker with $18 to his name. Today, he was, what? An investigator? A consultant? A man in over his head trying to pay back a debt he didn't fully understand? Lily was asleep on Mrs. Chen's couch when he arrived, her math book open beside her. Mrs. Chen smiled and waved off his apologies about being late. She had dinner, did her homework, watched one show. "Good girl, you're Lily." Ethan carried his daughter upstairs, her head heavy on his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. He tucked her into bed without waking her, then stood in her doorway watching her sleep, this small person who depended on him for everything. He thought about Margaret Weiss's warning, about Victoria's trust, about the patterns in the expense reports that might mean everything or nothing. He thought about the choice he'd made at the bus stop, giving away his last money to a stranger, and how that choice had led him here, to this moment where he held power he'd never asked for and responsibility that terrified him. Tomorrow he'd tell Victoria what he'd found. Tomorrow they'd decide what it meant and what to do about it. Tomorrow the investigation would continue. But tonight he was just a father standing in his daughter's doorway, grateful for the warmth and the full refrigerator and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, everything was about to change for the better. He just had to hope he wasn't wrong about who to trust. The morning air carried the first real bite of November as Ethan walked into Hale Industries at 8:30 half an hour earlier than Victoria had requested. Sleep had been elusive, his mind spinning through the connections he'd found, testing them for weaknesses, wondering if he was building a case or a fantasy. The security guard recognized him this time, nodding him through without the skeptical once-over from yesterday. His office felt different in the early morning quiet, more real somehow. Yesterday, it had seemed like a stage set, temporary and unearned. Today, it was simply a room where he had work to do. Ethan spread his notes across the desk, organizing them into clusters of information that told a story he was still learning to read. Meridian Solutions and their repetitive payments. David Price's Chicago trips that aligned perfectly with those payments. The Chen family connections threading through multiple departments. Margaret Weiss's defensive visit and her warning about paranoia. And underneath it all, the email hack and the robbery and the coup attempt, each one timed to maximum disruption. He was so focused on the timeline he was building that he didn't hear Victoria enter until she spoke. "You're here early." Ethan looked up. Victoria stood in his doorway holding 2 coffee cups, her expression softer than the corporate authority she'd worn yesterday. She was dressed more casually today, or what passed for casual at this level, slacks and a silk blouse instead of the full suit, her hair down around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep," Ethan admitted. "Join the club." She handed him one of the coffees and sat in the chair across from his desk. "Show me what you found." For the next 20 minutes, Ethan walked her through the patterns. He explained the Meridian Solutions payments, the lack of documentation, the Chicago address. He showed her David Price's travel records and how they matched the payment schedule almost perfectly. Then he pulled up the vendor contact information. "Marcus Chen," Ethan said, pointing to the name on the screen. "Any relation to Stephen and Robert?" Victoria's face had gone very still. "Their cousin. He worked here briefly 5 years ago in business development. We let him go for misrepresenting client relationships." "So Stephen's brother is in IT? Their cousin is receiving payments through a shell consulting company, and Stephen himself tried to force you out while David Price was making regular trips to where that company is supposedly based." "It's circumstantial," Victoria said, but her voice was tight. "It's a pattern," Ethan countered. "Look at the timing. The first Meridian payment was 7 months ago. 2 weeks later, Robert Chen was promoted to Senior Systems Administrator, which gave him elevated access to your servers. A month after that, your email was hacked. 3 months later, David Price started his regular Chicago trips. Last month, the coup attempt." Victoria stood and walked to the window, her coffee forgotten. "If you're right, this has been planned for over half a year. They've been positioning pieces, building toward something." "The question is what?" Ethan said. "The payments total about $800,000, but that seems small for a corporate takeover. Maybe it's funding something else." "Or someone else," Victoria said quietly. She turned back to face him. "We need to look at Robert's activity logs. See what systems he's been accessing, what data he's touched. If he's been collecting information to sell to a competitor, there'll be traces. Can we access those logs without him knowing? Not easily. IT monitors their own systems. If we request Robert's activity records, he'll be notified automatically." Victoria's jaw tightened with frustration. "Unless we go around him entirely. How?" "We bring in an outside forensic team. Tell them we're doing a routine security audit. Give them direct access to the servers. Robert can't block an audit without raising red flags." Ethan nodded slowly. "When can we start?" "I'll make calls this morning." Victoria moved toward the door, then stopped. "Mr. Cole." "Ethan, this is good work. Better than I expected this quickly." "I'm just following the numbers." "No," Victoria said. "You're seeing what you're supposed to see. That's different. Most people look at data and see what they expect or what they're trained to recognize. You're looking at it like someone who knows what it's like when people lie to cover their tracks." The observation hit closer than Ethan wanted to admit. He'd spent weeks trying to prove he hadn't stolen from the warehouse, tracing inventory records and shift schedules, looking for the truth in numbers that had been deliberately manipulated to frame him. He hadn't found it in time to save his job, but he'd learned how to read the shape of deception. "My supervisor at the warehouse," Ethan said quietly. "When he was stealing, he buried it in patterns that looked normal. A few items here, a few there, always under the threshold that would trigger automatic review. The only way to see it was to step back and look at everything together. And that's what you're doing here. Trying to. Victoria studied him for a long moment. I'm glad you called me back, Ethan. I don't think you realize how much I needed someone who understands what it's like to be accused of something you didn't do. She left before he could respond, but her words stayed with him. He hadn't thought about their situations as parallel, but maybe they were. Both of them facing betrayal from people who were supposed to be trustworthy. Both of them trying to prove the truth against a narrative designed to destroy them. The morning passed in intense focus. Ethan dug deeper into the expense records, finding more irregularities. Equipment purchases that were approved but never delivered. Vendor invoices that didn't match purchase orders. Small discrepancies that individually meant nothing but together suggested systematic skimming. At 11, Jessica appeared at his door. Mrs. Hale asked me to tell you the forensic team will be here this afternoon. They'll need you to walk them through what you found. Me? Ethan felt a spike of panic. Shouldn't Victoria do that? She's handling the board. They're pushing for her resignation, threatening a vote of no confidence. Jessica's professional mask slipped slightly, showing worry underneath. It's not going well. After she left, Ethan sat staring at his notes, feeling the weight of what he'd uncovered. If he was right, he was about to expose a conspiracy that could save Victoria's position. If he was wrong, he was about to embarrass her in front of professional investigators and give her enemies more ammunition. The forensic team arrived at 2 p.m., 3 people in business casual carrying laptop cases and portable drives. Their leader was a woman in her 40s named Sarah Vance, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She shook Ethan's hand with a grip that communicated competence. Mr. Cole, I understand you've identified some concerning patterns in the financial records. Possibly, Ethan said, hating how uncertain he sounded. I'm not an expert, but some things seemed off. Show me. For the next hour, Ethan walked Sarah and her team through everything he'd found. The Meridian Solutions payments, the travel patterns, the equipment purchases with no delivery confirmations, the timing that aligned too perfectly to be coincidence. Sarah listened without interrupting, making notes on her tablet, occasionally asking clarifying questions that made Ethan realize how much he still didn't understand. This is solid preliminary work, Sarah said when he finished. Circumstantial, but suggestive. The real question is whether we can tie it to deliberate fraud or if it's just sloppy accounting. How do we find out? We look at the digital trails, email communications, file access logs, server activity. If Robert Chen was using his position to facilitate this, he'll have left fingerprints. She gestured to her team. We'll need direct access to your IT infrastructure. Can you arrange that? Ethan called Victoria's extension. She answered immediately, her voice strained. Yes? The forensic team needs server access. Should I have Jessica coordinate with IT? No, I'll handle it myself. Give me 10 minutes. When Victoria appeared, she looked like she'd been through a battle. Her composure was intact but fragile, held together by will rather than ease. She greeted Sarah with professional courtesy and led the forensic team toward the elevator, leaving Ethan alone with his doubts. He tried to go back to the expense reports, but concentration was impossible. Instead, he found himself staring out the window at the city below, thinking about Lily and how he'd promised her that things were getting better. What if he was wrong? What if this investigation blew up in his face and took Victoria down with him? Mr. Cole? Ethan turned to find Robert Chen standing in his doorway. He was younger than his brother Stephen, maybe early 30s, with the thin build and pale complexion of someone who spent most of their life indoors. His expression was pleasant, but his eyes were calculating. I don't think we've met, Robert said, extending his hand. Robert Chen, IT Systems. Ethan shook his hand, fighting to keep his face neutral. Ethan Cole. I know. Word travels fast in a company this size. Robert stepped into the office, his gaze sweeping across the desk covered in financial printouts. I heard Mrs. Hale brought you in to look at some accounting issues. Just reviewing some records. Must be interesting coming in cold like this. No history with the company, no preconceptions. Robert's tone was conversational, but something underneath felt like a probe. Of course, that also means no context for what's normal versus what's anomalous. I'm learning, Ethan said carefully. I'm sure you are. Robert moved closer to the desk. Mind if I ask what specifically you're looking for? Maybe I can help. I've been with the company 6 years, know the systems inside and out. The offer sounded helpful, but Ethan heard the threat beneath it. Robert wanted to know what they'd found, how much danger he was in. The forensic team was already accessing his servers, which meant he knew something was happening even if he didn't know the details yet. Just general irregularities, Ethan said. Mrs. Hale wanted fresh eyes on the numbers. Yes, the famous irregularities. Robert's smile didn't reach his eyes. Between you and me, I think she's chasing ghosts. The company has some challenges, sure, but nothing that points to conspiracy. Sometimes when you're under pressure, you start seeing threats that aren't really there. It was almost exactly what Margaret Weiss had said. The same message, delivered with the same careful concern that masked something else entirely. I'm just doing what I was asked, Ethan said. Of course, and I'm sure you're doing it well. Robert glanced at his watch. I should get back. But Mr. Cole, a word of advice from someone who's been through corporate restructurings before. Be careful about getting caught in the middle of executive conflicts. People like us, we're expendable when the big players start fighting. He left as smoothly as he'd arrived, but his visit had accomplished what it intended. Ethan now knew that Robert was aware of the investigation, which meant whoever he was working with would know soon, too. The clock was ticking faster. Ethan called Victoria immediately. Robert Chen just came to my office. What did he want? To find out what we know. He was subtle about it, but he's worried. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Sarah's team found something. Email correspondence between Robert and Marcus Chen discussing project deliverables and timeline acceleration. Nothing explicitly incriminating, but the timing matches the Meridian payments. That's good, right? It's a start, but we need more. Sarah wants to examine Robert's personal workstation tonight after he leaves. She thinks he might have been using company resources to communicate with outside parties. Will she find evidence? If it exists, she'll find it. Victoria's voice hardened. But Robert knows we're looking now. He'll be cleaning up, covering tracks. We're in a race against time. The rest of the afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Ethan tried to work, tried to focus on building the documentary case that would support whatever Sarah's team found digitally. But his mind kept circling back to Robert's visit, to the careful warning about being expendable, to the feeling that forces were moving beneath the surface that he couldn't see. At 6 p.m., Victoria called him to her office. She looked exhausted, sitting behind her desk with files spread around her like fortifications. The board meeting was brutal, she said without preamble. They want my resignation by end of week. They say the company's performance has declined under my leadership and they're losing confidence in my vision. Can they actually force you out? They can make my position untenable, force a vote of no confidence, bring in an interim CEO, gradually push me to the margins until I have no choice but to resign. She rubbed her eyes. The ironic thing is that the performance decline they're citing is largely due to the very sabotage we're investigating. Someone's been making us look bad deliberately, and it's working. What about what we've found? Can you show them the evidence? Not yet. It's still too circumstantial. If I go to the board with accusations I can't prove, I look paranoid and they'll use it as further justification to remove me. Victoria stood and walked to the window, her silhouette backlit by the city lights. We need something concrete, something that proves deliberate fraud, not just poor accounting. Sarah will find it. Maybe. Or maybe Robert's already destroyed anything that could implicate him. She turned back to face Ethan. I need you to do something for me, and you're not going to like it. What? I need you to talk to Margaret. Tell her what we've found about the Chen family connections and Meridian solutions. See how she reacts. Ethan felt his stomach drop. You want me to confront her? I want you to inform her, Victoria corrected. If she's innocent, she'll help us. If she's complicit, she'll react in ways that tell us what we need to know. Either way, we learn something. Why me? Why not you? Because she sees me as the enemy right now. She's defensive, protective of her position. But you're an outsider, someone she might underestimate. She might let something slip that she'd never reveal to me. It made sense strategically, but that didn't make Ethan feel any better about it. When? Now. She's still in her office, working late on the quarterly projections the board demanded. Victoria handed him a folder. This contains copies of everything you found. Show it to her. Tell her we're bringing in outside auditors. Watch her reaction. Ethan took the folder with hands that wanted to shake. What if I mess this up? You won't, Victoria said with more confidence than he felt. Just be honest. That's what you're good at. Margaret's office was 2 floors down, smaller than Victoria's but still impressive, with walls covered in framed certifications and awards. She looked up when Ethan knocked, her expression shifting from concentration to guarded surprise. Mr. Cole, what can I do for you? I need to show you something, Ethan said, stepping inside and closing the door. He spread the documents on her desk, walking her through the same pattern he'd shown Sarah and Victoria. Margaret listened in silence, her face unreadable, her fingers steepled under her chin. When he finished, she sat back in her chair. This is what you've been doing the last 2 days? Building a conspiracy theory around normal business operations? These aren't normal, Ethan said. The payments are too regular, the documentation too sparse, the connections too convenient. They're unusual, I'll grant you that, but unusual isn't illegal. Margaret picked up one of the printouts showing David Price's travel. David went to Chicago frequently because we were courting a major client there. The fact that a consulting firm is also based in Chicago is hardly evidence of coordination. What about Meridian Solutions? $800,000 in payments with no deliverables, no contract, no documentation? Sloppy accounting, Margaret said, which I've been trying to fix for months, but Victoria's been too distracted to approve the changes I recommended. And Robert Chen's cousin being the vendor contact? Chicago has millions of people, Mr. Cole. The fact that Marcus Chen shares a surname with our IT administrator doesn't prove they're working together. She stood, gathering the documents into a neat pile. This is exactly what I warned you about. Victoria is seeing conspiracy where there's only coincidence and mismanagement. She's bringing in external auditors, Ethan said. They'll determine what's real and what's coincidence. Margaret's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been concern. When? Soon. Maybe tomorrow. She handed the documents back to him. Then I suppose we'll see, won't we? If there's fraud, I want it exposed as much as Victoria does. I've spent 8 years building credibility in this company. I won't have it destroyed by criminal behavior. Even if the criminals are people you work with? Especially then, Margaret said firmly. If Stephen and David and Robert were involved in something illegal, I want them prosecuted. But I also want facts, not speculation driven by fear. Ethan studied her face, trying to read the truth beneath the professional exterior. She seemed genuine, angry at the implication but willing to cooperate. Or she was an excellent liar, protecting herself until she knew how much evidence existed. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Weiss. Mr. Cole, Margaret said as he reached the door. One more thing. Be careful about letting Victoria's paranoia become your own. She's been under enormous stress, and stressed people don't always see clearly. Don't let her drag you into something that could damage both your futures. Ethan walked back to his office feeling more confused than enlightened. Margaret had been defensive but not panicked, dismissive but not hostile. She'd either told him the truth or performed it perfectly, and he had no idea which. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. How did it go? Not sure. She denied everything, offered to cooperate with auditors. Meet me in my office. When Ethan arrived, Victoria was standing at her desk with her phone pressed to her ear, her face pale. She hung up as he entered and sat down heavily. Sarah just called, she said. They found deleted emails on Robert's workstation, correspondence with Stephen Chen, David Price, and someone using an encrypted address. The emails discuss extracting value before the transition and ensuring cooperation from key personnel. That's evidence, Ethan said. That proves coordination. It proves they were talking, but the emails are carefully worded, nothing explicitly criminal. Sarah says a good lawyer could argue they were discussing legitimate business strategy. Victoria's hands clenched into fists. We're so close, Ethan. We know they're guilty, but we can't prove it in a way that would stand up in court or convince the board. What about the Meridian payments? Can we trace where that money actually went? Sarah's working on it, but the company is registered in Delaware with layers of shell corporations. It could take weeks to unravel. We don't have weeks. No, Victoria agreed. We have maybe 3 days before the board forces me out. At which point, whoever's been orchestrating this takes control and buries any evidence that still exists. Ethan thought about Robert's visit, about Margaret's warnings, about the web of connections that was almost visible but not quite complete. There had to be something they were missing, some piece that would tie everything together. "The coup attempt," he said suddenly. "When Stephen and David and Margaret tried to force you out, what exactly did they say?" That the company was failing, that the board had lost confidence, that their buyout offer was generous given the circumstances. "Who was buying you out?" Victoria's eyes widened slightly. "They didn't specify. They said it was a private equity firm, but they wouldn't name which one until I agreed to terms. Because if they named it, you could research it, find out who was really behind the offer." Ethan pulled out his phone, typing quickly. What if Meridian Solutions isn't just a consulting company? What if it's the vehicle they're using to fund the takeover? 800,000 isn't enough to buy a company worth 800 million. No, but it's enough to fund the preparation. Lawyers, accountants, payoffs to key people to ensure cooperation. Ethan looked up from his phone. Margaret said ensuring cooperation from key personnel in the emails. What if they've been buying allies inside the company? Victoria stood abruptly. Pull up the personnel records, everyone who's been promoted or received significant bonuses in the last 6 months. They worked together, cross-referencing promotions and bonuses against the timeline of Meridian payments. The pattern emerged slowly but undeniably. Robert Chen promoted 2 weeks after the first payment. 3 mid-level managers receiving substantial bonuses the same week as the email hack. David Price's assistant getting a raise right before the coup attempt. "They've been building a coalition," Victoria said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Buying loyalty, positioning people. Creating a network that would support the takeover from the inside. And when the time came, they'd force you out, bring in their own CEO, and have enough internal support to make it look legitimate." "The question is who's financing it," Victoria said. "Meridian Solutions is the conduit, but someone's funding Meridian, someone with resources and motivation to take control of this company." Ethan's phone buzzed with another text. He glanced at it and felt his blood run cold. The message was from an unknown number. "Stop investigating or your daughter pays the price." His hands went numb. The phone nearly slipped from his grip. "Ethan, what is it?" He showed her the text, unable to speak. Victoria read it and her face went hard as stone. "They're threatening Lily," Ethan managed to say. "They know about Lily." "Where is she right now?" "At school. She gets out in 20 minutes. Victoria was already moving, grabbing her phone, calling Marcus. "I need security at Roosevelt Elementary School immediately. There's a credible threat against Ethan Cole's daughter. Yes, now. I don't care what you have to cancel." She hung up and gripped Ethan's shoulders. "Marcus will have people there in 10 minutes. They'll stay with her until you arrive. She'll be safe." "How did they know about her?" Ethan's voice sounded distant to his own ears. "How did they even know I exist?" "Robert has access to everything. He could have pulled your personnel file, found your address, researched your family." Victoria's jaw tightened. "This means we're close. They're desperate enough to threaten a child, which means they know we're about to expose them." "I don't care about exposing them," Ethan said, anger burning through the fear. "I care about keeping my daughter safe." "Then we end this. Tonight. We find the proof we need and we end it before they can hurt anyone else." Victoria's phone rang. She answered immediately, listened for 30 seconds, then hung up with an expression of grim satisfaction. Sarah traced one of the Meridian wire transfers. It was rerouted through 3 banks, but the original source was a private equity firm called Titan Holdings. "Who owns Titan Holdings?" "That's the interesting part," Victoria said. "It's owned by a consortium of investors, but the managing partner is listed as Richard Weiss." The name hit Ethan like a punch. "Weiss, as in Margaret Weiss?" "Her ex-husband," Victoria said quietly. "They divorced 5 years ago. It was ugly, involved accusations of financial misconduct. Margaret left that marriage with nothing and had to rebuild her career from scratch. So this is revenge? This is her taking back what she thinks she's owed." Victoria's voice was flat, emotionless. "She's been working with her ex-husband to engineer a takeover, using the Chen family to do the dirty work, positioning herself as the sympathetic insider who tried to stop it, but was overruled. And when you're forced out, The board brings in new leadership, probably someone Richard Weiss suggests. Margaret is elevated to CEO as the person who understands the company best. Titan Holdings gradually acquires controlling interest, and Margaret ends up running the company she helped steal. Ethan felt sick. She played us. The warning, the cooperation, all of it was theater. She's been playing everyone, Victoria said, and we're going to prove it. She called Sarah back, gave her the Titan Holdings connection, and told her to find every link between Richard Weiss, Margaret, and the conspirators. Then she turned to Ethan. Go get your daughter. Make sure she's safe. Tomorrow morning, we bring everything to the board, the emails, the payments, the Titan connection, all of it. We end this. Ethan was already running for the elevator, his heart hammering, thinking only of Lily and whether Victoria's security would reach her in time. The city blurred past as he drove too fast toward Roosevelt Elementary, praying he wasn't too late, praying the people who'd threatened his child had only wanted to scare him, not hurt her. When he screeched to a stop in the school parking lot, he saw Marcus standing at the entrance with two other security personnel, their presence calm and professional. And between them, holding Marcus's hand and looking confused but safe, was Lily. Ethan ran to her, swept her up, held her so tight she squeaked in protest. Daddy, you're crushing me. Sorry, sweetheart, sorry. He set her down but couldn't let go, his hands on her shoulders, checking her face, her arms, making sure she was real and whole and safe. Who are these people? Lily asked, looking at Marcus. Friends of Daddy's, Ethan said. They're going to make sure we get home safely. Why? Are we in danger? The innocent question nearly broke him. No, baby. Everything's fine. Everything's going to be fine. He looked up at Marcus, who nodded once, a silent message of confirmation. They'd keep watch. Lily would be protected. But as Ethan drove home with his daughter chattering about her day while security followed in a black SUV, he knew that nothing would be fine until Margaret Weiss and everyone working with her faced justice for what they'd done. Tomorrow, Victoria had said, tomorrow they'd end this. Ethan just hoped tomorrow came soon enough. The security detail stayed parked outside Ethan's apartment building until nearly midnight, their presence both reassuring and terrifying in what it represented. Lily had fallen asleep within minutes of getting home, exhausted from a day she didn't understand had been dangerous. Ethan sat on his worn couch in the dark, watching the SUV's taillights glow red in the parking lot, and felt the full weight of what he'd stepped into. His phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. Sarah found the smoking gun. Board meeting moved to 8 a.m. We present everything. Try to sleep. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion pulled him under some time after 1, dragging him into restless dreams of faceless threats and numbered accounts, and his daughter's voice calling for him from somewhere he couldn't reach. He woke at 5:30 to pale dawn light and the smell of coffee he hadn't made. For one disoriented moment, he thought he'd imagined everything, that he was still the broke, fired warehouse worker, and this had all been fever dream wishful thinking. Then he saw the suit hanging on his bedroom door, still in dry cleaning plastic, with a note in Victoria's handwriting. For today, you've earned the armor, V. The suit fit perfectly, charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, the kind of thing that cost more than he'd made in a month at his old job. Ethan stared at himself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man looking back. He looked competent, professional, like someone who belonged in a boardroom instead of someone who'd been giving away his last dollar 2 weeks ago. Mrs. Chen knocked softly at 6:30, arriving to watch Lily before school as she'd done the past few days. She took one look at Ethan in the suit and smiled. You look like a different person, Mr. Cole. I feel like one, Ethan admitted. Good, different, or bad different? He thought about that. I don't know yet. The security car was waiting downstairs, Marcus behind the wheel this time, his expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses despite the early hour. Mrs. Hale wanted me to drive you personally, Marcus said as Ethan slid into the back seat. She said today was too important to risk anything going wrong. What did Sarah find? Ethan asked. Victoria's message said smoking gun but didn't give details. Not my place to say, Marcus replied, pulling into morning traffic. But I've been doing this work 15 years, and I've never seen Mrs. Hale this focused. Whatever it is, it's enough. The city was just waking up. delivery trucks rumbling through intersections, early commuters clutching coffee cups, the sky shifting from gray to pale blue. Ethan watched it all through tinted windows and wondered if this would be his last day at Hale Industries. If the board sided with them, he might have a future here. If they didn't, he'd be back to unemployment, but this time with enemies who'd threatened his daughter. The thought made his hands clench into fists. Marcus pulled into the underground parking garage at 7:15, bypassing the main entrance for a private elevator that required a key card. They rode up in silence, the numbers climbing to 23, where Victoria's office anchored the executive floor. She was waiting in her office with Sarah Vance and two other people Ethan didn't recognize, all of them surrounded by laptops and stacks of documentation that covered every surface. Victoria looked up when Ethan entered, and something in her expression shifted, became almost gentle. "You look ready?" she said. "I'm terrified," Ethan admitted. "Good. Means you understand what's at stake." She gestured to the others. "You know Sarah. This is James Kowalski. He's our corporate attorney, and Linda Chen, no relation to the other Chens, she's our forensic accountant." Linda was in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that looked like they could audit your soul. "Mr. Cole, I understand the Meridian Solutions irregularities were your discovery." "I just noticed the pattern," Ethan said. "Sarah did the real work." "Pattern recognition is everything in financial fraud," Linda said. "The rest is just documentation. You have good instincts." Sarah pulled up a presentation on the large monitor mounted on Victoria's wall. "Here's what we have. 17 payments to Meridian Solutions over 6 months, totaling $847,000. No contracts, no deliverables, no legitimate business purpose. We traced the wire transfers through 3 intermediary accounts to Titan Holdings." "Owned by Richard Weiss," Victoria added, her voice flat. "Margaret Weiss's ex-husband," Sarah continued. "But it gets better. We pulled Margaret's financial records, legally, through her employee file and public records. 3 months ago, she transferred $200,000 to Titan Holdings as a capital investment." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "She was funding her own company's sabotage." "Not just funding it," James said, his lawyer's precision cutting through the shock. "She was orchestrating it. We found email correspondence between Margaret and Richard going back 8 months. They discuss removing Victoria from the equation, ensuring board cooperation, and final acquisition once the valuation drops sufficiently. They were deliberately tanking the company's performance, Victoria said, and Ethan could hear the betrayal beneath her controlled tone. Making us look like we were failing so the board would lose confidence and the stock price would drop. Then Titan Holdings could acquire us at a fraction of our actual value. "How much did they steal?" Ethan asked. "Directly, about $1.2 million in fraudulent payments and skimmed expenses," Linda said. "But the real theft was in devaluation. They cost the company approximately $40 million in lost contracts, damaged reputation, and depressed stock price." The number was so large it didn't feel real. Ethan thought about his $18 at the bus stop, about Lily's meals, about the scale of greed that could casually destroy $40 million in value just to steal what remained. "What about the threats against my daughter?" he asked quietly. Marcus spoke from his position near the door. "We traced the phone number to a burner purchased in Chicago 3 days ago. The same day David Price flew there for his weekly visit. We can't prove he sent the text, but the circumstantial evidence is strong. So we have Margaret, Richard Weiss, the Chen family, David Price, all coordinating to steal the company," Ethan said. "Do we have enough to convince the board?" "We have enough to send them to prison," James said grimly. "The question is whether the board will listen before they vote to remove Victoria." Victoria checked her watch. "They'll be here in 20 minutes. We present everything, the financial fraud, the emails, the Titan connection, all of it. The board has 2 choices. They can side with us and call the police, or they can side with Margaret and become accessories to corporate theft. They could also decide we're making this up," Sarah pointed out. "Margaret's been cultivating relationships with board members for months. She has allies." "Then we make the evidence so overwhelming they can't ignore it," Victoria said. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk, the sound of someone who'd built an empire and wasn't about to watch it stolen. "Let's review the presentation one more time. No gaps, no weak points, nothing they can use to dismiss us." For the next 15 minutes, they rehearsed, Victoria walking through each slide while James and Sarah provided supporting details. Ethan watched and listened, marveling at how they'd taken his scattered observations about unusual payments and transformed them into a comprehensive case for criminal prosecution. At 7:55, Jessica appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Hale, the board is assembling in the conference room. Mrs. Weiss just arrived." "Perfect timing," Victoria said, her expression unreadable. "Let her think she's safe for 5 more minutes." They walked together to the conference room at the far end of the executive floor, a space dominated by a massive oval table and windows that overlooked the city. 8 board members were already seated, men and women in expensive suits carrying the weight of fiduciary responsibility and corporate power. At the far end sat Margaret Weiss, composed and confident, her laptop open in front of her. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Ethan in his suit, carrying files with Sarah and James, clearly part of Victoria's team instead of the pawn she'd thought she was playing. The momentary crack in her composure was deeply satisfying. "Good morning," Victoria said, taking her seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I know you're here expecting to discuss my resignation. We're going to discuss something else instead." Robert Hargrove, the board chair, frowned. "Victoria, we've been through this. The company's performance has been declining for months. The shareholders are losing confidence. We need new leadership." "You need honest leadership," Victoria corrected, "which you've had all along. What you haven't had is honest accounting, honest reporting, or honest advice from certain members of your executive team." Margaret stood smoothly. "Victoria, if this is another paranoid accusation—" "Sit down, Margaret," Victoria said, her voice cutting like a blade. "Or leave now and make this easier for everyone. But if you stay, you're going to hear exactly what you and your ex-husband have been doing to my company." The room went silent. Margaret slowly sat down, her face carefully neutral, but Ethan saw her hands grip the table edge. Sarah pulled up the first slide, showing the Meridian Solutions payment schedule. Over the past 6 months, this company has paid $847,000 to a consulting firm that doesn't exist. The money was transferred through shell corporations to Titan Holdings, a private equity firm owned by Richard Weiss. Another slide showing Margaret's capital investment. Margaret Weiss transferred $200,000 to Titan Holdings 3 months ago, making her a direct investor in the company that's been stealing from Hale Industries. The board members leaned forward, expressions shifting from skepticism to sharp attention. "This is ridiculous," Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Titan Holdings is a legitimate investment firm. My personal investment decisions have nothing to do with company business." "Then explain these emails," James said, pulling up correspondence between Margaret and Richard. He read aloud, his voice flat and damning. Quote, "The board is almost ready. 2 more quarters of bad performance, and they'll force her out. Make sure the Q3 numbers look worse than they are." End quote. "That's taken out of context," Margaret tried, but she was pale now. "Here's another one," James continued. Quote, "Robert says the email hack was successful. Victoria suspects something but can't prove it. Keep pressure on the operations side and she'll crack." End quote. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation, Ethan had learned to always check, spoke up. "Margaret, are these emails real?" It's complicated." "They're real," Sarah said flatly. "Verified through forensic analysis, complete with metadata and server logs. Margaret has been coordinating with her ex-husband, Robert Chen, in IT, Stephen Chen in operations, and David Price in strategic planning to systematically sabotage this company's performance." "Why?" Robert Hargrove asked, looking genuinely shocked. "Margaret, you're CFO. Why would you destroy the company you help run?" "Because she doesn't want to run it," Victoria said quietly. "She wants to own it. The plan was to tank our valuation, force me out, have the board bring in new leadership, probably someone Richard Weiss recommended, and then have Titan Holdings acquire us at a depressed price. Margaret would be elevated to CEO as the person who saved the company, and she and Richard would own what I built." Margaret's composure finally cracked. "What you built? You inherited this company from your father, Victoria. Some of us had to actually work for everything we have." "So this is about jealousy?" another board member asked. "This is about justice," Margaret shot back. 20 years I've worked in corporate finance, watching people like Victoria coast on family money and connections while people like me do the real work for a fraction of the recognition. You want to talk about theft? Victoria has been stealing credit for other people's success for years. That's not remotely true, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the anger in her eyes. But even if it were, it wouldn't justify fraud, sabotage, and corporate espionage. You can't prove any of this, Margaret said, grasping for control. Circumstantial evidence and out-of-context emails don't prove criminal intent. Linda spoke up for the first time, her accountant's precision cutting through the emotion. We have bank records showing direct transfers from Meridian Solutions to your personal account, Mrs. Weiss. $50,000 deposited in 3 installments over the past 4 months. Would you like to explain what service you provided to earn that money? Margaret's face went white. We also have testimony from Stephen Chen, Marcus said from the doorway. He was picked up by federal agents 2 hours ago. Apparently he's very interested in cutting a deal that keeps him out of prison. He's confirmed the conspiracy and named you as the primary architect. It was a bluff. Stephen hadn't been arrested yet, but Margaret didn't know that. Ethan watched her face cycle through shock, calculation, and finally defeat. I want immunity, Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll tell you everything, but I want immunity from prosecution. That's for the district attorney to decide, James said. Not us. Robert Hargrove stood, his expression grim. I'm calling an emergency vote. All in favor of immediately terminating Margaret Weiss's employment and turning this evidence over to law enforcement, signify by saying aye. The vote was unanimous. Security escorted Margaret from the conference room, her composure completely shattered, tears streaming down her face as she realized the empire she'd tried to steal had just collapsed around her. Ethan watched her go and felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion and a deep sadness for the waste of it all. Mrs. Hale, Patricia Chen said when the door closed, on behalf of the board, I apologize. We should have trusted your concerns instead of doubting your leadership. You had legitimate questions about performance, Victoria said. That's your job. Margaret was very good at making her sabotage look like my failure. What happens now? Another board member asked. Now we rebuild, Victoria said. We fill the positions vacated by the conspirators with people we can trust. We repair the relationships Margaret damaged. We restore confidence in this company's future. She paused. And we make sure something like this can never happen again. The meeting lasted another hour, discussing next steps and damage control. Ethan sat quietly, still processing the fact that they'd won. The conspiracy was exposed. Margaret and the others would face justice. Victoria's position was secure, and Lily was safe. When the board finally dispersed, Victoria stood at the conference room windows, looking out at the city with an expression Ethan couldn't read. We did it, he said quietly. You did it, Victoria corrected. If you hadn't noticed those Meridian payments, if you hadn't pushed to investigate, Margaret would have succeeded. The board would have forced me out, Titan would have acquired us, and she'd be running the company right now. I just followed the numbers. You followed your instincts about what was right, Victoria said. She turned to face him. Ethan, I meant what I said before. When this is over, you have a place here, a real position, not just temporary consulting. I need people I can trust, and you've proven you're exactly that. The offer was everything he'd hoped for, but something in Ethan hesitated. What kind of position? Director of Internal Oversight, Victoria said. You'd work directly with me to review operations, identify inefficiencies, prevent fraud. Basically, you'd do what you've been doing the past week, but with actual authority and a staff. I don't have the credentials for that, Ethan said. I never went to college. I worked in a warehouse. You have something better than credentials, Victoria interrupted. You have integrity and the ability to see patterns other people miss. That's worth more than any MBA. Ethan thought about Lily, about the stability a real job would provide. Thought about the satisfaction of catching people like Margaret, who thought they could steal with impunity. Thought about working with Victoria, who'd given him a chance when he had nothing. Can I think about it? He asked. Victoria smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since the bus stop. Take all the time you need, but Ethan, whatever you decide, thank you. You saved more than just my company. You reminded me that decent people still exist. Before he could respond, Jessica burst through the conference room door, her face flushed. Mrs. Hale, we have a problem. Robert Chen just tried to wipe the company servers. He triggered every security protocol we have. The building's in lockdown. Victoria's expression shifted instantly from grateful to dangerous. Where is he? Security has him cornered on the 14th floor. He's barricaded in the server room. They ran for the stairs, Victoria moving with surprising speed in heels, Marcus and 2 other security personnel falling in behind them. Ethan followed, his mind racing. Robert had to know it was over, that Margaret had been arrested, that the conspiracy was exposed. Wiping the servers was desperation, an attempt to destroy evidence even though copies existed off-site. Or maybe it was revenge. The 14th floor was chaos. Office workers evacuated into the hallways, security personnel positioned outside a reinforced door at the east end. Through a narrow window, Ethan could see server racks and blinking lights and Robert Chen sitting at a terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. What's he doing? Victoria demanded. One of the IT staff, a young woman with her laptop open, answered without looking up. He's trying to encrypt the entire database and delete the encryption keys. If he succeeds, we lose everything. Financial records, client data, operational systems, all of it. Can you stop him? Not remotely. He locked us out when he triggered the security protocols. Someone needs to get in there and physically disconnect him. I can breach the door, Marcus said, gesturing to the reinforced lock, but it'll take 5 minutes minimum. We don't have 5 minutes, the IT staffer said, her voice tight with panic. He's 70% through the encryption sequence. Once he hits execute, the damage is permanent. Ethan stepped forward. Is there another way in? There's a maintenance access panel in the ceiling, Marcus said. Opens into the crawl space above the server room, but it's narrow and there's no ladder. You'd have to... Show me, Ethan interrupted. Marcus looked at Victoria, who nodded once. They moved to a supply closet 30 feet down the hall. Marcus pointed up at a ceiling panel. Boost me up, Ethan said. Mr. Cole, this isn't your job. He threatened my daughter, Ethan said quietly. That makes it my job. Marcus interlaced his fingers and lifted Ethan toward the ceiling. He pushed aside the panel and pulled himself up into the cramped space above, barely enough room to crawl. Insulation and ductwork filled the darkness, lit only by emergency lighting filtering through gaps in the panels. Straight ahead, 15 feet, then left, Marcus's voice called up. You'll see light from the server room vents. Ethan crawled forward, his suit jacket catching on metal brackets, his knees scraping against support beams. The air was hot and stale, filled with the hum of electrical systems. He could hear Robert below, muttering to himself in frustration, as something on his terminal apparently wasn't working as planned. Come on, Robert was saying. Just execute, you piece of... Ethan reached the vent looking down into the server room. Robert sat directly below, his attention fixed on 3 monitors showing scrolling code and progress bars. 83% encrypted. The drop was maybe 8 feet. Ethan positioned himself over the vent, gripped the edges, and kicked hard. The vent cover crashed down with a sound like a gunshot. Robert spun around just as Ethan dropped through the opening, landing hard but staying on his feet. They stared at each other across 10 feet of server room floor. Don't, Ethan said. It's over, Robert. Margaret's under arrest. Stephen's cooperating. The board knows everything. Deleting the data won't save you. I don't care about saving myself, Robert said, and his expression was wild, desperate. My whole family is going to prison because of you, because you couldn't mind your own business. Your whole family is going to prison because they tried to steal a company, Ethan corrected. I just noticed. Robert's hand moved toward the keyboard. Ethan lunged forward, covering the distance in 3 strides, grabbing Robert's wrist before he could hit the enter key. They struggled, Robert surprisingly strong for his slight build, both of them crashing into a server rack that tilted dangerously. Let go, Robert shouted. Stop fighting, Ethan shouted back. The server room door burst open, Marcus and 2 other security personnel flooding in. They pulled Robert away from the terminal, forcing him to the ground despite his thrashing. Marcus moved to the keyboard and started typing rapidly. I need the shutdown sequence, he called to the IT staffer who'd followed them in. She rattled off a series of commands. Marcus executed them with precision. On the monitors, the encryption progress stopped at 89%, then began reversing, the system restoring from backup protocols. Robert stopped struggling, his face pressed against the floor, and started crying. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Margaret promised it would work. Margaret lied, Ethan said, standing over him. That's what people like her do. Security hauled Robert to his feet and walked him out in handcuffs. Ethan stood in the server room, his suit torn, his hands shaking with adrenaline crash, and tried to process what had just happened. Victoria appeared in the doorway, her expression cycling through relief, concern, and something that might have been admiration. "You dropped through the ceiling," she said. "Seemed like the thing to do," Ethan replied. "You could have been hurt." But I wasn't. She walked over and straightened his torn jacket collar with surprising gentleness. "You're bleeding. Your hand." Ethan looked down and saw blood welling from a cut on his palm where he'd grabbed a sharp edge during the fall. It didn't hurt yet, but he knew it would soon. "Come on," Victoria said. "Medical office now. And then I think you've earned the rest of the day off." The medical office cleaned and bandaged his hand while Victoria made phone calls coordinating with law enforcement, legal counsel, and the board. By the time they finished, it was nearly noon, and Ethan felt like he'd lived through a week compressed into one morning. They stood in Victoria's office, the city spreading beneath them, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "I need to pick up Lily from school," Ethan finally said. "She gets out at 3. "Marcus will drive you," Victoria said. "And Ethan, about that position I offered. Take the weekend, think about it, talk to Lily, but I meant every word. You belong here." "I'm not sure I belong anywhere yet," Ethan said honestly. 2 weeks ago, I was broke and fired. Now I'm stopping corporate conspiracies and dropping through ceilings. I don't know who I'm supposed to be." Victoria smiled, that same genuine expression from the conference room. "Maybe you're supposed to be exactly who you are. Someone who does the right thing even when it costs him. Someone who gives away his last dollar to a stranger and doesn't expect anything in return." "I got a lot more than $1 back," Ethan pointed out. "We both did," Victoria said quietly. "That night at the bus stop, I thought I'd lost everything. My company, my reputation, my faith that people could be decent without an angle. You proved me wrong about that last part. You reminded me that kindness still exists." Ethan thought about that moment, about the desperation that had made him give away money he couldn't afford to lose. It seemed like years ago instead of 2 weeks. "I should go," he said. "Lily will want to hear about my day, though I'm not sure how much I should tell a 6-year-old about corporate fraud." "Tell her you helped catch some bad people," Victoria suggested, "and that her father is braver than he thinks." Marcus drove Ethan home, the afternoon sunlight making the city look clean and new. Ethan stared out the window and thought about Victoria's offer, about stability and purpose and the chance to rebuild into something better than what he'd lost. When he picked up Lily from school, she ran to him the way she always did, her backpack bouncing, her face bright with whatever had happened in her 6-year-old world that day. "Daddy, we learned about butterflies today. Did you know they taste with their feet?" "I didn't know that," Ethan said, lifting her up. "That's pretty cool." "What did you do today?" Ethan thought about server rooms and board meetings and conspiracies exposed. "I helped my friend with an important project, and I think we did a good job." "Was it fun?" "Parts of it were scary," Ethan admitted. "But mostly it felt good, like we fixed something that was broken." "That's good," Lily said seriously. "Broken things should be fixed." They walked home together, her hand in his, and Ethan realized that for the first time in months, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like possibility. That night, after Lily was asleep, Victoria called his personal phone. "I wanted you to know," she said. "The district attorney is filing charges against Margaret, Robert, Stephen, David, and Richard Weiss. They're looking at conspiracy, fraud, computer crimes, and racketeering. The DA says they have enough to put them away for years." "Good," Ethan said, and meant it. "There's something else," Victoria continued. "Your old supervisor, the one who fired you and blamed you for his theft. I had our legal team look into it. We found proof of his embezzlement and turned it over to the police. He was arrested this afternoon." Ethan sat down heavily on the couch. Why would you do that? Because it was the right thing to do, Victoria said simply. And because no one should lose everything over a lie. You deserve justice too, Ethan. After they hung up, Ethan sat in the dark apartment and let himself feel the weight lifting. The supervisor who'd destroyed his reputation was facing consequences. The people who'd threatened his daughter were going to prison. And tomorrow he'd have to decide what kind of future he wanted to build. But tonight, he was just grateful to be here, alive and safe, with his daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall, and the possibility that sometimes kindness really did come back around. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything feel possible. Ethan woke to find Lily already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her coloring book spread out, humming to herself while she carefully filled in a butterfly with purple crayon. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, pouring himself coffee from the pot he'd learned to make properly now that they could afford good beans. "Morning, Daddy. Can we go to the park today?" "Absolutely," Ethan said, and realized with a small shock that he could say yes without calculating bus fare or worrying about the time it would take away from job searching. The weight of constant scarcity had lifted so gradually he hadn't noticed until this moment how much lighter he felt. They spent the morning at Roosevelt Park, where Lily ran between the swings and the slide with the boundless energy of childhood. Ethan sat on a bench watching her, his phone in his pocket buzzing occasionally with messages he chose to ignore. Today was about his daughter, about remembering why he'd given away his last $18 in the first place. Around noon, his phone rang with Victoria's name on the screen. He almost didn't answer, wanting to preserve the normalcy of the morning, but something made him pick up. "I'm sorry to interrupt your weekend," Victoria said, and she actually sounded apologetic. "But I have someone here who wants to meet you. Well, she's been asking to meet you since Thursday, but I wanted to give you time to breathe first." "Who?" Ethan asked, watching Lily climb the ladder to the slide for the dozenth time. "My daughter Sophie. She's 10, and when I told her about the man from the bus stop who helped me get home that night, she insisted on thanking you personally." Victoria paused. "We're at the farmer's market on 5th Street. If you and Lily want to join us for lunch, it would mean a lot to her, to both of us." Ethan looked at Lily, her face flushed with joy as she whooshed down the slide. "Can I bring my kid to your lunch?" "That's exactly what I'm hoping," Victoria said warmly. "Sophie could use a friend. Being the CEO's daughter at a new school hasn't been easy for her." They met at the farmer's market 30 minutes later, the air fragrant with fresh bread and late-season apples. Victoria looked different in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, the corporate armor completely shed. Beside her stood a girl with dark hair and Victoria's intelligent eyes, holding a bag of kettle corn and looking both shy and determined. "You're Mr. Cole," Sophie said before anyone could make introductions. "Mom says you're the kindest person she's met in years." "Your mom is very generous," Ethan said, kneeling down to Sophie's eye level. "It's nice to meet you." "This is Lily," Victoria said, smiling at Ethan's daughter, who was hiding halfway behind her father's leg. "Sophie, why don't you show Lily the face painting booth?" The girls regarded each other with the careful assessment children use when deciding if someone might be a friend. Then Sophie held out the bag of kettle corn. "Want some? It's really good." Lily emerged from behind Ethan's leg and took a piece. "I like your shoes." "Thanks, they light up, see?" Sophie stomped her feet, making the sneakers flash. "Do you want to get your face painted? I'm going to get a butterfly." "I love butterflies," Lily said, and just like that, the ice was broken. The girls ran off toward the face painting booth, leaving the adults to follow at a more measured pace. "She seems like a great kid," Ethan said. "She is," Victoria replied, watching her daughter with an expression of fierce love. "She's been through a lot the past few years. The divorce was ugly, my ex-husband fought for custody just to hurt me, and I've been so focused on the company that I haven't always been as present as she needed." She glanced at Ethan. "That night at the bus stop, I was coming from the hotel where she was staying because I'd promised to read her a bedtime story. When you gave me that bus fare, you didn't just help me. You helped me keep a promise to my daughter." They walked in silence for a moment, weaving between market stalls selling honey and handmade crafts. Ahead, Lily and Sophie were laughing together while the face painter transformed their cheeks into matching purple butterflies. "I've been thinking about your offer," Ethan said. "The director position." "And?" Victoria's tone was carefully neutral, but he could hear the hope underneath. I'm scared I'll fail, that I'll prove everyone right who said I didn't belong in that world. The admission came easier than he expected. I dropped out of high school to help my mom when she got sick. Got my GED later, but I never went to college. Everything I know about business, I learned in a warehouse or from watching people who went to schools I couldn't afford. Some of the worst business decisions I've seen came from people with MBAs from top universities, Victoria said. They knew the theories, but not the reality. You understand how things actually work because you've lived it. That's worth more than any credential. What if I let you down? Victoria stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Ethan, you jumped through a ceiling to stop a man from destroying my company's servers. You noticed a pattern that professional auditors missed. You stood up to people who threatened your daughter and didn't back down. The only way you could let me down is if you let fear stop you from trying. Lily's laughter rang out across the market as Sophie chased her between the stalls, both girls giggling so hard they could barely run. Ethan watched them and thought about the future, about stability and purpose, and the chance to be someone his daughter could be proud of. Okay, he said, I'll take the position, but I need time to learn, and I'm going to make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, Victoria said. The question is whether you learn from them, and I think you will. They bought lunch from a Thai food truck and sat at a picnic table while the girls devoured pad Thai and spring rolls, chattering about school and butterflies and whether unicorns were real. Watching them together, Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight control he'd maintained for so long. This felt normal in a way nothing had in months. Not charity, not obligation, just two single parents sharing a meal while their daughters became friends. Can Lily come over sometime? Sophie asked Victoria. We could watch movies and I could show her my room. If that's okay with her father, Victoria said, glancing at Ethan. Can I, Daddy? Lily asked, her face bright with hope. Sure, sweetheart, Ethan said, and caught Victoria's smile. The afternoon stretched into evening, the four of them walking through the market as the autumn sun painted everything golden. They bought apples and fresh bread, looked at handmade jewelry neither adult could afford, but both daughters found fascinating, and watched a street musician play guitar while Sophie and Lily danced unselfconsciously. When they finally parted ways, Sophie hugged Lily goodbye like they'd been friends forever, and Victoria touched Ethan's arm with unexpected warmth. Thank you for today, she said quietly. I haven't seen Sophie this happy in months. Thank you for the lunch invitation, Ethan replied, and for everything else. We'll talk Monday about the position details, salary, benefits, start date. But Ethan, no matter what happens with the job, I hope we can stay friends, you and Lily both. Driving home in the used car he'd been able to buy with his first consulting paycheck, Lily chattering in the back seat about her new friend Sophie, Ethan felt the last piece of his old life finally release its grip. He wasn't the fired warehouse worker anymore. He wasn't the desperate father at the bus stop. He was someone new, someone still being defined, and for the first time that felt like possibility instead of loss. Monday morning arrived with the surreal quality of a threshold being crossed. Ethan dressed in another of the suits Victoria had arranged for him, this one navy blue, and helped Lily get ready for school with the familiar routine that grounded him when everything else felt uncertain. You look fancy, Daddy, Lily observed, studying him critically. Is today important? Pretty important, Ethan admitted. I'm starting my new job officially. The one where you help Miss Victoria catch bad people? Sort of. Now I'll help make sure bad people don't try to do bad things in the first place. That's good, Lily said with the absolute moral certainty of 6 years old. Bad people should know they can't do bad things. At Hale Industries, Jessica greeted him with a genuine smile and a folder containing his employment paperwork. Welcome officially, Mr. Cole. Mrs. Hale asked me to get you set up in your new office before the staff meeting at 10. The new office was larger than his temporary space, with windows on 2 walls and furniture that looked like it had been selected for comfort as well as professionalism. On the desk sat a nameplate that read, Ethan Cole, Director of Internal Oversight, in brass letters that caught the morning light. Ethan touched it carefully, still half expecting someone to tell him this was all a mistake. It's real, Victoria said from the doorway, reading his expression. And deserved. Stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. The staff meeting was held in the main conference room, packed with employees from every department, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. Victoria stood at the front with Ethan beside her, and he could feel the weight of their judgment, these people with their credentials and experience wondering who this outsider was and why he deserved authority over them. Most of you know we recently uncovered a significant fraud conspiracy, Victoria began, her voice carrying the natural authority of someone born to lead. What you may not know is that the conspiracy was discovered by someone with no formal training in accounting or investigation, someone who simply looked at our numbers and asked the right questions. She gestured to Ethan. This is Ethan Cole, our new Director of Internal Oversight. His job is to do what he did with the fraud case, look at our operations with fresh eyes, identify inefficiencies and risks, and help us build a stronger, more transparent company. Some of you will work directly with him. All of you should know that his door is open and his commitment is to the truth, not to protecting any particular department or executive. A hand went up in the back. A young man in his 20s, wearing the slightly rumpled look of someone from IT. What are Mr. Cole's qualifications? It was the question Ethan had been dreading, the one that made him want to shrink back into invisibility, but Victoria's hand on his shoulder steadied him. My qualifications are that I know what it's like when people lie to cover their mistakes, Ethan said, his voice stronger than he felt. I know what it looks like when numbers don't add up because someone's hiding something. I worked in a warehouse for 3 years until my supervisor framed me for theft he committed. I spent months trying to prove my innocence and failing because I didn't have the resources or the connections to fight back. The room had gone completely silent. I don't have an MBA, Ethan continued. I don't have certifications or advanced degrees. What I have is experience being on the wrong end of corporate dishonesty, and I will never let that happen to someone else if I can prevent it. My job is to make sure this company operates with integrity, that the numbers are honest, and that people like my old supervisor don't get away with destroying lives for their own profit. The IT worker nodded slowly. That's actually a pretty good qualification. A few people laughed, breaking the tension. Victoria smiled. Mr. Cole will be building his team over the next few weeks, she continued. If you're interested in working with him, applications are open. If you have concerns about operations in your department, his door is open. If you see something that doesn't seem right, he wants to hear about it. Questions? A woman from accounting raised her hand. Will Mr. Cole be reviewing all department budgets? Eventually, yes, Victoria said. But we're starting with the areas most impacted by the recent fraud. Accounting, IT, operations, and strategic planning will be first. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, covering logistics and expectations. When it finally ended, several people approached Ethan to introduce themselves, some offering genuine welcome, others clearly reserving judgment. He shook hands and made small talk and tried to remember names that blurred together in his nervousness. By noon, his head was spinning with information about reporting structures and system access and departmental hierarchies. He was reviewing organizational charts when Sarah Vance appeared in his doorway. Surviving your first day? She asked. Barely, Ethan admitted. How do you keep all these people and processes straight? Practice and good notes, Sarah said, sitting across from his desk. I wanted to tell you something. The forensic work we did on the fraud case, that's some of the cleanest initial investigation I've seen in 15 years. You built a solid foundation that made everything else possible. I just noticed the patterns. That's literally the job, Sarah said with a slight smile. Most people miss the patterns because they're too close or too comfortable. You weren't either, and it saved the company. Don't undersell what you did. After she left, Ethan sat quietly, letting himself absorb the validation. He'd spent so long feeling like a failure, like someone the world had used up and discarded, that accepting success felt like learning a new language. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Lunch in my office? Want to discuss something? When he arrived, she had Chinese takeout spread across her conference table and an expression that was part professional, part something softer. I have a proposition, Victoria said as they ate, and I want you to think about it seriously before answering. Okay, Ethan said cautiously. Sophie's birthday is next month. She's turning 11, and she's asked if she can have a small party, just a few friends from school. Victoria set down her chopsticks. She also asked if Lily could come, and if you could come. Of course Lily can come, Ethan said. You don't have to ask permission for that. I'm not asking permission, Victoria said. I'm asking if you'd want to come too. Not as an employee or an obligation, but as a friend. Someone I'd like to have there. Ethan studied her face, seeing uncertainty there that didn't match the confident CEO exterior. You don't have many friends, do you? Victoria laughed, but it was tinged with sadness. Not real ones. I have business associates and board members and people who want things from me. But friends? People who knew me before the title and the money and still chose to spend time with me? She shook her head. That night at the bus stop, you saw me at my lowest, crying, desperate, completely stripped of the armor I wear every day. And you helped me anyway, not because of who I was, but because I needed help. Anyone would have done the same. No, Victoria said firmly. They wouldn't. 12 people walked past me at that bus stop before you arrived. None of them stopped. None of them cared. She met his eyes. You did. And I'd like to believe that wasn't just random kindness, but the beginning of something that could become friendship. Ethan thought about the past 3 weeks, about how Victoria had given him more than just money and a job. She'd given him respect and trust and the chance to rebuild his dignity. She'd become part of his life in ways that went beyond professional obligation. I'd like that too, he said quietly. And yes, I'll come to Sophie's party. Victoria's smile was radiant, transforming her face into something younger and more vulnerable. Good, because Sophie will be impossible if you say no, and I'm not sure I could handle impossible right now. They finished lunch talking about lighter things, about Sophie's obsession with marine biology and Lily's newfound interest in butterflies, about the logistics of single parenthood and the constant juggling of work and family, about how isolating it could be at the top and how hard it was at the bottom, and how maybe somewhere in the middle was where real connection happened. The weeks that followed established a rhythm that felt both strange and right. Ethan built his oversight team carefully, choosing people who valued honesty over politics, who asked uncomfortable questions instead of accepting convenient answers. He reviewed department operations, identified cost savings and efficiency improvements, and slowly earned the respect of employees who'd initially seen him as an interloper. He and Victoria fell into an easy pattern of collaboration, meeting twice a week to review findings and discuss strategy. But they also started having lunch together regularly, conversations that began with business and drifted into personal territory. She told him about her father's death and the pressure of inheriting a company she'd felt unprepared to run. He told her about Lily's mother, who'd left when their daughter was 2, unable to handle the reality of parenthood. Sophie and Lily became inseparable, playdates turning into sleepovers, homework sessions turning into giggling conspiracies. Watching them together, Ethan saw his daughter blossom in ways he hadn't realized she'd been wilting. The loneliness of being an only child with a struggling single father gradually replaced by genuine friendship. On a Friday evening in late November, Ethan picked up Lily from Victoria's house after a sleepover. Victoria answered the door in yoga pants and a sweatshirt, her hair messy, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. "Come in," she said. "The girls are in the middle of a very serious Lego construction project." Ethan followed her inside, struck by how different her home was from what he'd expected. Not a mansion, but a comfortable house in a good neighborhood, filled with Sophie's artwork and books and the casual disorder of actual living. "I thought you'd have something more," he gestured vaguely. "Corporate?" "You mean cold and impersonal?" Victoria laughed. "I spend enough time in glass towers. Home should feel like home." They found the girls in Sophie's room, surrounded by elaborate Lego structures representing what Sophie explained was an underwater research station. "Lily designed the submarine," Sophie said proudly. "She's really good at building things." "She gets that from her dad," Ethan said. "I used to build model cars when I was a kid." "Can you help us with the docking station?" Lily asked. "We can't get it to connect right." Ethan sat on the floor, instantly absorbed in the problem of Lego engineering. Victoria watched from the doorway, her expression soft, then quietly left. When she returned 20 minutes later with hot chocolate for everyone, she found all 3 of them sprawled on the floor, the docking station successfully completed, and a new argument underway about whether the research station needed a garden. "It's underwater," Sophie was saying. "They can't have regular gardens." They could have seaweed gardens, Lily countered, for food and oxygen. That's actually scientifically accurate, Ethan pointed out. Aquatic plants do produce oxygen. See? Lily said triumphantly. Victoria handed out mugs and sat beside Ethan on the floor, their shoulders touching companionably. I think I'm outnumbered on the garden issue. Mom always gets outvoted, Sophie confided to Lily. We have to gang up on her. That's not fair, Victoria protested, but she was smiling. They stayed like that for another hour, building and laughing and existing in the easy comfort of people who'd become important to each other. When Ethan finally said they needed to head home, he realized the sun had set and he felt more content than he had in years. Thank you for today, he said as Victoria walked them to the door. Thank you for staying, Victoria replied. It's nice having people around who don't need anything from me except company. In the car, Lily chattered about the Lego station and Sophie's ideas for expansion, but then she went quiet in a way that meant she was thinking hard. Daddy, she said finally, do you like Miss Victoria? Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Of course I like her. She's my friend. No, I mean like her. Like, wanna be her boyfriend, like? The question caught him completely off guard. Why would you ask that? Because you smile different when you talk to her, Lily said with the devastating perceptiveness of children. And she smiles different when you're there. It's the way people look in movies when they like each other. Ethan drove in silence for a moment, examining his feelings with the honesty his daughter's question deserved. Did he have feelings for Victoria beyond friendship? The thought had crossed his mind in unguarded moments, quickly dismissed as impossible. She was a CEO worth hundreds of millions, and he was barely 3 months removed from counting his last coins. The gap between their worlds felt insurmountable. But when he thought about her laugh, about the vulnerability she showed only to him, about how naturally they fit together despite every logical reason they shouldn't, I don't know, Lil, he said honestly. She's my friend and my boss, and that makes things complicated. Sophie says her mom doesn't date because everyone just wants her money, Lily said. But you don't want her money, right? You just want to be her friend. Right, Ethan confirmed. So that makes you different than everyone else, Lily concluded with 6-year-old logic that was surprisingly sound. Maybe that means you could like her without it being bad. Ethan had no answer to that, so he changed the subject to what they should have for dinner. But Lily's words stayed with him through the weekend, coloring every interaction with Victoria in shades of possibility he'd been trying to ignore. Sophie's birthday party arrived on a Sunday afternoon in early December, the house decorated with streamers and balloons in her favorite colors. A dozen kids from school ran through the rooms playing games while parents clustered in the kitchen making small talk. Ethan felt out of place among the well-dressed mothers and successful fathers, but Victoria kept finding excuses to pull him into conversations, her hand on his arm familiar and grounding. Having fun? She asked during a quiet moment while the kids were occupied with cake. Surprisingly, yes, Ethan admitted, though I keep expecting someone to realize I don't belong here. You belong exactly as much as anyone else, Victoria said firmly. More than most, actually. You're one of the few people here who isn't calculating what they can gain from knowing me. Before he could respond, Sophie appeared with Lily in tow, both girls flushed with sugar and excitement. Mom, can we do presents now? Sophie asked. The present opening was chaos, wrapping paper flying while Sophie exclaimed over books and art supplies, and a microscope she'd been wanting for months. When she reached Lily's gift, a carefully wrapped box containing a handmade friendship bracelet Lily had spent weeks making, Sophie's eyes filled with tears. This is the best present, she declared, putting it on immediately, because you made it yourself. Lily beamed with pride, and Ethan felt his throat tighten watching his daughter experience the joy of giving. After the other guests left, the 4 of them collapsed on the couch together, exhausted and happy. Sophie leaned against her mother on one side while Lily curled up against Ethan on the other, the girls' friendship bracelet-wearing hands clasped between them. Best birthday ever, Sophie announced. I'm glad, Victoria said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. You deserve the best. Ethan met Victoria's eyes over the girls' heads and saw something there that made his heart skip. Warmth, yes, and gratitude, but also something deeper. Something that looked like hope. After the girls fell asleep watching a movie, Ethan and Victoria moved to the kitchen to clean up the party debris. They worked in comfortable silence, washing dishes and throwing away plates, until Victoria spoke quietly. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Of course. When I was at that bus stop crying over losing everything, I actually prayed. And I'm not religious, haven't been since I was a child, but I was so desperate I prayed anyway." She paused, her hands still in the soapy water. "I asked for a sign that the world wasn't entirely cruel, that kindness still existed somewhere. And then you sat down next to me." Ethan dried a plate slowly, processing her words. "I'm not anyone's answered prayer, Victoria. I'm just a guy who gave away his last dollar." "Maybe that's exactly what an answered prayer looks like," she said, turning to face him. "Not a miracle, just a decent person making a choice to help when they didn't have to." They stood close in her kitchen, the sleeping children in the next room, the evening settling around them with the weight of something shifting. Ethan was acutely aware of the space between them, barely a foot, and how easy it would be to close that distance. "Ethan," Victoria said softly, "I need to be honest about something. These past few months, working with you, spending time with you and Lily, it's become the best part of my life. Not because you helped save my company, but because you see me, the real me, not the CEO or the title or the money, just Victoria." "I see someone amazing," Ethan said, his voice rough. "Someone brilliant and strong and kind, who's been hurt, but hasn't let it make her hard. I see someone who gave away everything when he had nothing, who jumped through a ceiling to protect people he barely knew, who's rebuilding his life with grace and integrity." Victoria's eyes were bright. "I see someone I've fallen in love with, and I don't know if that's okay to say, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." The words hung between them, vulnerable and brave. Ethan's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Terrified I'll mess this up, that the gap between our worlds is too big, that I'll disappoint you or Lily will get hurt, or—" Victoria closed the distance between them, her hands finding his. "I'm terrified too. I haven't let anyone close in years because everyone wanted something. But you never did. You just wanted to help a stranger get home safely." "That $18 was the best investment I ever made," Ethan said, making her laugh through tears that had started falling. "It bought you a CEO's eternal gratitude," Victoria said. "It bought me something better," Ethan corrected, pulling her closer. "It bought me you." When he kissed her, it felt like every moment since the bus stop had been leading to this. The investigation, the friendship, the slow building of trust between two people who'd both been hurt and both learned to be careful. It felt like choosing hope after despair, like taking a risk when playing it safe had left them both alone. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria was smiling through her tears. "The girls are going to be impossible about this," she said. "They've been plotting to get us together for weeks." "Lily asked me if I liked you," Ethan confessed. "Apparently I smile different when I talk about you." "Sophie said the same thing about me," Victoria laughed. "They're 10 and 6, and they figured it out before we did." They went back to the living room where the girls were still asleep, Sophie's head on Lily's shoulder, both of them peaceful and perfect. Ethan and Victoria sat on the opposite couch, her head on his shoulder now, his arm around her waist, and watched their daughter sleep. "What happens now?" Ethan asked quietly. "Now we figure it out together," Victoria said. "Slowly, carefully, making sure the girls are okay with every step. But together." "I can do together," Ethan said, kissing her temple. "Together sounds perfect." The months that followed weren't fairy tale perfect, but they were real in ways that mattered more. Ethan and Victoria navigated the complexity of workplace romance by being scrupulously transparent, ensuring his position was evaluated by external consultants to prove he'd earned it on merit. They took things slowly with the girls, family dinners and movie nights, before introducing the idea of dating, letting Sophie and Lily adjust at their own pace. The girls, predictably, were thrilled. They'd been best friends for months. Becoming sisters felt like natural progression. In February, the district attorney's office secured convictions against Margaret Weiss, Robert Chen, and their co-conspirators. The sentences ranged from 5 to 12 years, with Margaret receiving the longest term for orchestrating the conspiracy. Ethan attended the sentencing with Victoria, watching justice finally land where it belonged. In April, Hale Industries posted its strongest quarterly earnings in 3 years. The company's reputation rebuilt through transparency and solid operations. The board formally apologized to Victoria for doubting her leadership and extended her contract with unanimous approval. In June, Ethan received an apology letter from his former supervisor, written from prison, taking responsibility for the theft that had cost Ethan his job. It didn't undo the damage, but it provided a closure he hadn't known he needed. And on a warm Saturday afternoon in early October, exactly 1 year after the bus stop that changed everything, Ethan took Lily and Victoria and Sophie to Roosevelt Park. They spread a blanket under the trees where the leaves were just starting to turn, and he pulled out a small box he'd been carrying for weeks. "I've been thinking about that night," Ethan said to Victoria while the girls played nearby. "About the choice I made to give you my last $18. Everyone told me I was crazy, that I needed it more, that helping a stranger was foolish when I had my own problems." "You helped anyway," Victoria said softly. "I helped because I saw someone who needed it, and I had something to give." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring. "I still don't have much compared to what you could have. I'm still learning how to be the kind of man who deserves you. But I have something I can give, and I'm hoping you'll accept it." Victoria's hands covered her mouth, tears already falling. "I'm offering you my tomorrow," Ethan continued. "Every single one I have left. I'm offering you a partnership where we face whatever comes together, where we build something real, where we prove that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything." "Yes," Victoria said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, absolutely yes." The girls erupted in cheers, revealing they'd been watching the whole time despite pretending to play. They ran over and tackled both adults in a group hug that tumbled everyone onto the blanket in a mess of laughter and happy tears. "Does this mean we're sisters for real?" Lily asked Sophie. "For real sisters," Sophie confirmed. Later, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Ethan held Victoria's hand and watched their daughters chase fireflies across the grass. He thought about the bus stop, about desperation and choice, and the strange alchemy that had transformed his lowest moment into this. "What are you thinking?" Victoria asked. "That I'd give away 1,000 last dollars if they all led here," Ethan said. "To you, to this, to us." "You gave away everything when you had nothing," Victoria said. "Now you have everything because you did." She was right. $18 had bought him a new life, not because of the money, but because of what the giving represented: integrity over self-interest, compassion over calculation. The belief that helping another person mattered more than protecting what little he had. That choice had led him here, to a woman he loved and a family he was building and a future that looked nothing like what he'd imagined sitting at that bus stop a year ago. It had led him to himself, to the person he'd always been underneath the fear and the failures, someone capable of extraordinary things when he stopped being afraid to try. The girls ran back as the first stars appeared, breathless and happy, demanding hot chocolate and stories. Victoria stood and pulled Ethan to his feet, and together they gathered their daughters and headed toward home. Not her home or his home, but the home they were building together, one choice at a time, one act of kindness rippling outward into a life worth living. And if someone had told Ethan a year ago that giving away his last $18 to a crying stranger would lead to all of this, to love and family and purpose and joy, he might not have believed them. But he would have given the money anyway, because that's who he was. That's who he'd always been. And in the end, that made all the difference.